In the corridors of ancient power, where knowledge was a divine gift, a darker force began to creep. What was once a sacred tool to elevate civilizations became a weapon used to control, manipulate, and dominate. From Egypt's priests to modern secret societies, those who guarded wisdom sought not only enlightenment, but the power to shape history. As wisdom was hoarded by the few, the question echoed through the ages. When knowledge becomes the key to power, does it lead to salvation or destruction? In the dim-lit corridors of ancient civilizations, wisdom once sought by the elite began to slip into the hands of those with darker ambitions. Knowledge, the very thing that elevated cultures and shaped empires, became a double-edged sword. The pursuit of truth, the quest to understand the forces that shaped the universe, soon became entangled with power, control, and manipulation. But what happens when wisdom, meant to enlighten, is used to control, and in the process, leads to corruption? The answer lies in a forbidden path that stretches across centuries, from the temples of Alexandria to the hidden meeting rooms of today's secret societies. In the earliest days of human civilization, knowledge was sacred. It was a divine gift, passed down through generations, kept hidden from the unworthy, the ignorant. In Egypt, Mesopotamia, and ancient Greece, the priests, philosophers, and mystics held the keys to a vast, unexplored world. They were seen as mediators between the gods and humanity. Their sacred knowledge wasn't just intellectual, it was spiritual. To understand the workings of the universe, of nature, of life itself, was to hold power. But the thirst for power was not limited to the gods. Men too sought that power. The guardians of these secrets were revered, but they were also vulnerable, for the knowledge they held was not just a tool for understanding. It was a weapon. As these ancient societies began to fracture, the first cracks appeared in the foundation of what had been considered sacred. What happened when those with the wisdom became seduced by it? As early as the time of the first dynasties in Egypt, stories circulated about secret practices, rites, and rituals that held the potential to transform the practitioner. But these secrets weren't accessible to everyone. Only those with the right bloodline, the right status, or the right connections could hope to attain the coveted knowledge. The rest of humanity remained in the dark, relegated to a life of superstition, ignorance, and faith. But what if those with the knowledge weren't the holy men or philosophers, but those who sought to control the masses? The earliest recorded instance of the manipulation of wisdom for power can be traced back to ancient Egypt. The priests of Egypt, particularly those who operated in the grand temples of Thebes, understood the mysteries of life and death. They knew of the stars, the cycles of the moon, the medicine that could cure diseases, and the ways to preserve the body after death. But they also knew how to use that knowledge to control the kingdom. Through their religious rituals, their ability to interpret the will of the gods, and their mastery of sacred texts, the priests were able to dictate the lives of pharaohs and peasants alike. They convinced the population that pharaohs were divine, that their every command was the will of the gods. In doing so, they became the true rulers of Egypt, far more powerful than the kings themselves. It wasn't simply about preserving knowledge, it was about preserving power. As the centuries passed, this cycle repeated itself across the world. In Greece, the philosopher priests like Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle began to uncover truths about mathematics, astronomy, and the natural world. But while their teachings were revolutionary, they also began to hint at something darker. A hidden wisdom, a secret knowledge. The ancient mystery schools of Pythagoras and the followers of the Eleusinian mysteries were centered around an initiation process that was designed to guard the deepest secrets of the cosmos. To be initiated was to gain access to something that could transform the individual. But with this transformation came a profound responsibility. It was clear that these secrets weren't just meant to be passed on freely. The mystery schools weren't just about enlightenment. They were about control. The elite were taught the sacred geometry, the metaphysics of the soul, and the spiritual pathways that allowed them to transcend the mortal realm. But to the outside world, these teachings were reserved for a select few. The power they could wield, the wealth they could amass was unimaginable. But what happens when those in power decide to keep these secrets to themselves? when the pursuit of wisdom turns from an act of enlightenment to an act of domination. This is where the story takes a darker turn. The desire for knowledge began to transcend the noble pursuit of truth. The gods of wisdom, once revered, began to serve a different master power. By the time the ancient world began to fade, the line between the pursuit of wisdom and the thirst for control had become indistinguishable. The mysterious schools of thought, which were once dedicated to the betterment of mankind, had now become breeding grounds for corruption. The ancient world wasn't the only one to fall prey to this temptation. As the centuries rolled on, the story of forbidden knowledge continued to unfold in the shadows. The Roman Empire, with its vast reach and complex bureaucracy, was a breeding ground for secret societies, many of which still persist today in various forms. The emperors themselves, although they ruled with absolute power, often found themselves drawn to the esoteric teachings that promised to unlock the deepest mysteries of existence. Figures like Julius Caesar and Augustus were not just statesmen. They were initiates in the mystery schools of Egypt and Greece, searching for the key to eternal power. These emperors knew that the most potent knowledge was not just the ability to rule, it was the ability to manipulate fate itself. But it wasn't just the ruling class who sought this forbidden wisdom. The common man, too, sought to grasp it. As the Roman Empire crumbled and the Dark Ages began, small groups of wandering scholars and mystics continued to study the lost wisdom of the ancients. They didn't have the luxury of the grand temples or the support of the state, but their passion for knowledge was no less intense. These secret societies were the last vestiges of a knowledge once thought to be divine. As these small, fragmented groups continued their studies, they passed down their knowledge in secret. And so, the seeds of corruption were sown. Knowledge, meant to be shared and revered, became the privilege of the few. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, a new age of enlightenment had arrived, but so had a new generation of power-hungry individuals who would use that knowledge for their own gain. The humanist philosophers like Erasmus and Thomas More championed the idea of a return to classical wisdom. But beneath their noble pursuits lay the same hunger for power that had always accompanied the search for forbidden knowledge. The Renaissance saw the birth of secret societies like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and the Illuminati. These groups claimed to be guardians of truth, of hidden wisdom, and of enlightenment. Yet, as history would show, they were just as corruptible as the ancient priests and rulers before them. Their thirst for knowledge and power began to intersect, and what was once a tool for spiritual growth became a means of control. As we stand today, at the threshold of a new age of information and technology, the question still remains: what happens when wisdom, meant to free us, is hijacked for the pursuit of power? The echoes of these ancient secret societies can still be felt today, in the corridors of government, in the boardrooms of corporations, and in the shadowy corners of the internet. The path from wisdom to corruption is perilous, but one thing is certain: as long as knowledge exists, it will continue to be sought after by those who wish to wield it for their own gain. But the true cost of this forbidden knowledge, this power, is something humanity has yet to fully comprehend. And as the search for it intensifies, so too does the danger it poses. For in the end, wisdom is not always the key to salvation. Sometimes, it's the very thing that leads to our destruction. In the vast, ancient landscapes of early civilization, the thirst for knowledge became a driving force that shaped not only the intellectual life of cultures but their very survival. The earliest guardians of wisdom were the priests, shamans, and scribes who dedicated their lives to the study of the natural world, the cosmos, and the divine. These learned individuals were more than just intellectuals. They were the keepers of the truth, the ones who had the power to interpret the will of the gods and the forces that governed life. In the sacred spaces of temples and sanctuaries, knowledge was passed down through generations with great reverence, cloaked in mystery, and protected from the ignorant masses. But there was an undeniable allure to this forbidden wisdom, and it was not long before others began to covet it, not for the sake of enlightenment, but for power. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to elevate knowledge to a divine level. The scribes and priests of Egypt were the intellectual elite, granted access to vast libraries of texts that contained secrets of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, wisdom that, if fully understood, could provide the power to shape the future. The Egyptian priests not only performed religious rituals, but also acted as administrators, advisors, and even healers. They understood the cosmic order, the relationship between the stars and the earth, the healing properties of plants, and the secrets of life and death. But their knowledge wasn't freely shared. It was jealously guarded. Only the initiated were allowed to peer into the sacred texts and engage with the divine wisdom contained within them. These texts were not just about practical knowledge. They were steeped in metaphysical concepts, mystical symbols, and divine truths that the priests believed could bring them closer to the gods. The pharaohs themselves, the rulers of Egypt, were seen as divine beings, god-kings who ruled with the authority of the gods. But even they were not immune to the power of the priesthood. The priests, who held the keys to the sacred knowledge, were often the true rulers of Egypt. The pharaohs needed them to interpret divine will, to ensure the prosperity of the kingdom, and to maintain cosmic harmony. In return for their allegiance, the priests enjoyed immense power and wealth. The very stability of the kingdom depended on the priesthood's ability to wield knowledge with authority. But over time, as the gods of Egypt became more distant and the influence of the ruling class began to wane, the priests of Egypt became something more than just spiritual guides. They became political players, leveraging their knowledge to manipulate the kingdom's rulers and control the fate of the empire. In ancient Greece, the story of forbidden knowledge took a different turn. While the Egyptians kept their knowledge hidden within the temples and sacred texts, the Greek philosophers sought to uncover the mysteries of the universe through reason and observation. Figures like Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle sought to understand the underlying principles that govern the cosmos. They were not just seeking knowledge for knowledge's sake. They believed that by understanding the natural order, they could achieve a deeper understanding of the divine. For these philosophers, knowledge was a path to enlightenment, a way to understand not just the material world, but the spiritual world as well. However, even in Greece, the line between wisdom and power was often blurred. The great philosophers of ancient Greece were not simply academics or teachers. They were often political figures, deeply involved in the affairs of state. Plato's Academy, for instance, wasn't just a school of philosophy. It was a place where political ideas were formed and where the foundations of Western political thought were laid. But even more than that, these philosophers were part of a larger tradition of secret societies, initiations, and hidden wisdom that stretched back to the ancient mysteries of Egypt and Babylon. The Eleusinian mysteries, which were held in honor of the goddess Demeter, were perhaps the most famous of these secret societies. Initiates to these rites were promised not only knowledge but a direct connection to the divine. The knowledge revealed during these rites was so sacred, so powerful, that it was never to be spoken of again. The mystery schools of Greece were founded on the belief that knowledge could unlock higher truths, but they also understood the power that knowledge could bestow. To hold such knowledge was to possess a weapon, one that could be used to shape the course of history. And it wasn't long before this knowledge began to seep into the hands of the powerful. The Pythagoreans, for example, held the secrets of mathematics and geometry, believing that the underlying structure of the universe could be understood through numbers. This knowledge, which was once a source of enlightenment, became a tool of control. Those who understood the hidden principles of the universe could not only manipulate nature but the very course of events. The Greeks, like the Egyptians before them, understood that knowledge was a force that could bend the world to one's will. But the real shift came when these secret teachings, once the domain of the initiated, began to seep into the hands of the rulers themselves. The likes of Alexander the Great, a man who believed in the divine right of kings, sought to conquer the known world not just through military might but through the spread of Greek culture and philosophy. Alexander's conquests were not simply about territory. They were about spreading Greek wisdom to the farthest reaches of the ancient world. His vision was one of a global empire united by the principles of Greek thought. But behind this noble idea lay a more dangerous ambition, the pursuit of absolute control through the dissemination of knowledge. The great conqueror was no longer just a warrior. He was a philosopher king, using the wisdom of the Greeks to assert his dominance over the known world. Even as Alexander's empire crumbled, the influence of Greek philosophy spread throughout the Mediterranean. The Romans, ever eager to assimilate and adopt the knowledge of the Greeks, saw in these teachings a path to power. Roman leaders, from Julius Caesar to Augustus, were deeply influenced by Greek thought. The Romans built upon the Greek foundations of governance, law, and philosophy, but they also recognized the potential of knowledge as a tool of manipulation. The rise of imperial Rome marked the beginning of an age in which knowledge was wielded not just for enlightenment but for domination. In the shadows of the Roman Empire, secret societies began to take shape, many of them rooted in the esoteric wisdom of the ancient Greeks and Egyptians. The earliest forms of what would later become the Western tradition of secret societies were born in this period. These societies, while not as widespread or organized as those that would emerge in the Renaissance, existed as small, underground groups of intellectuals and mystics who sought to preserve the sacred knowledge of the ancients. But as the empire grew and crumbled, the power of these secret societies only grew stronger. They became the custodians of forbidden knowledge, their wisdom passed down in whispers and coded symbols. To possess this knowledge was to possess the power to alter the course of history. The idea that knowledge could be a source of control didn't disappear with the fall of Rome. In fact, the Dark Ages saw the rise of new, even more secretive groups, as well as the preservation of knowledge by monks and scholars who, despite being part of religious orders, recognized the power of what they held. The monasteries of Europe became centers of learning, but they were also places where ancient texts were hidden away, where knowledge was not always shared freely. The monks themselves, although ostensibly devoted to God, also understood that the control of knowledge was synonymous with the control of power. In this period, the concept of forbidden knowledge began to take on a more mystical dimension. Alchemy, astrology, and the occult became intertwined with the quest for wisdom, as scholars and mystics sought to unlock the hidden secrets of the universe. They believed that by understanding the arcane forces that govern nature, they could achieve mastery over life itself. The transformation of base metals into gold, the search for the philosopher's stone, and the quest for eternal life all became part of this darker path of knowledge. No longer was knowledge just a means of understanding the world. It had become a way of bending the world to one's will. It is in the pursuit of this knowledge that we see the dangerous intersection of wisdom and corruption. What was once a noble quest for enlightenment became, for many, a road to power. The philosophers, alchemists, and scholars of the past understood that to possess knowledge was to possess control, not only over nature but over the minds and hearts of people. And so, the path from wisdom to corruption was paved, each generation passing down the secrets of the past, knowing full well that the knowledge they held was both a gift and a curse. What began as an earnest search for truth became a path fraught with danger, a path that would continue to lead those who dared to tread it into dark places, far from the light of enlightenment. As ancient civilizations expanded their reach and their influence, so too did the depth and complexity of their secret societies, religious orders, and intellectual circles. The early guardians of wisdom, such as the priests of Egypt or the philosophers of Greece, had long maintained a careful balance between keeping their knowledge sacred and sharing it with those deemed worthy of its understanding. But as time passed, something more dangerous began to take root within these circles, a desire not just to protect knowledge, but to wield it as a tool for power. And this subtle, gradual shift would pave the way for the rise of the secretive organizations and brotherhoods that would shape the course of history in ways that still echo today. The transformation from knowledge as a spiritual pursuit to knowledge as a weapon of influence began with these early societies, and it was through their mystical and occult practices that the seeds of corruption would be sown. The Greeks were no strangers to secret wisdom. In fact, many of their most revered philosophers and mathematicians were deeply involved in mysticism and the occult. Pythagoras, for example, is often remembered for his contributions to mathematics, but he was also a mystic and spiritual leader who founded a school based on the belief that the universe could be understood through numbers and that numbers themselves were imbued with divine significance. This belief system went far beyond simple mathematics. It was a framework for understanding the divine order of the universe. The Pythagoreans, as they came to be known, saw knowledge as a tool not just for intellectual growth, but for spiritual enlightenment. Yet, the very nature of their teachings, the secrecy, the exclusive initiation rites, the notion of a select group of individuals possessing access to this divine knowledge, marked the first significant steps toward the idea of secret societies. The Pythagoreans were not alone in their mysticism. Plato's Academy, which he founded in Athens, also upheld the idea that there were higher truths, truths that could only be uncovered by those who were willing to go beyond the physical world and venture into the realm of the metaphysical. The idea of the philosopher king, which Plato proposed in his Republic, was grounded in the belief that only those who had access to deeper knowledge could govern justly. To Plato, knowledge was not merely academic, it was divine, and it was a power that needed to be wielded responsibly. But as with the Pythagoreans, this knowledge was not meant for all to possess. The teachings of the Academy were meant to be carefully guarded, accessible only to those who had proven their worth. This selective access to wisdom marked the beginning of a new kind of power, one that wasn't based on wealth or military might, but on the possession of knowledge that few could attain. But while the Greek philosophers' pursuit of knowledge was rooted in spiritual and intellectual ideals, there was also an undeniable undercurrent of political and personal ambition that ran through their work. This was especially true in the case of Aristotle, who was a tutor to Alexander the Great, the conqueror who sought to unify the known world under the banner of Greek culture and philosophy. Aristotle's teachings were not just about understanding the world, they were about using that understanding to rule it. The connection between philosophy and politics was inextricable, and Aristotle's influence on Alexander the Great was profound. Through Alexander, the Greek philosophical tradition was spread across the known world, from the Mediterranean to the farthest reaches of Asia. But the spread of this knowledge was not solely for the purpose of enlightenment. Alexander's empire building was in many ways a quest for power, and the Greek philosophy that accompanied it was part of his broader effort to control not just lands, but minds. As Greek philosophy and mysticism spread across the ancient world, it began to blend with the ancient religious traditions of Egypt, Persia, and other civilizations. The convergence of these traditions created a fertile ground for the development of secret societies and occult practices. The mystery religions of the ancient world, such as the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, the Mithraic mysteries in Persia, and the Egyptian cults dedicated to gods like Osiris and Isis, were centered around esoteric knowledge that was only accessible to initiates. These mystery religions shared common themes: the idea of secret knowledge that could unlock the mysteries of life, death, and the cosmos, initiation rites that transformed the individual, and the promise of immortality or spiritual transcendence. The rituals of these mystery schools were often shrouded in secrecy, and to be initiated into their mysteries was considered to be a privilege. But it was also a responsibility, for with the knowledge came power, and with power came the potential for corruption. The Eleusinian mysteries, for example, were held annually in honor of the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone. Initiates were promised a deeper understanding of life and death, and the ceremonies themselves involved symbolic acts of death and rebirth. These mysteries were so sacred that the details of the rites were kept secret, and to reveal them was punishable by death. But the appeal of the mysteries was undeniable. For those who participated, the promise of enlightenment and transcendence was worth the risk of secrecy. The ability to understand the true nature of the universe, to unlock the divine wisdom that lay hidden behind the veil of the material world, was a tantalizing prospect. The power that came with this knowledge was immense, and the secrecy that surrounded it only added to its allure. As these mystical practices gained influence, so too did the rise of secretive organizations that sought to control and perpetuate this knowledge. The rise of Rome brought with it the eventual decline of the old mystery religions. But even within the empire, there were those who continued to seek out the hidden truths of the universe. The Roman Empire, despite its many achievements in law, governance, and military might, was deeply influenced by the occult. Many Roman emperors, including Julius Caesar and Augustus, were deeply involved in the religious and mystical practices of the East, seeking to unlock the ancient wisdom that had been passed down from the pharaohs of Egypt to the Greeks and beyond. The emperor was not just a political figure, but a spiritual leader, a divine representative of the gods on earth. This belief in the emperor's divine right to rule was deeply rooted in the ancient traditions of mystery and occult knowledge. The rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire only added to the complex web of belief systems that surrounded the pursuit of hidden wisdom. Early Christian thinkers, while rejecting the mystery religions, nonetheless were drawn to the idea of esoteric knowledge. The Gnostic traditions, which held that secret, divine knowledge could lead to salvation, were particularly influential. Gnosticism taught that the physical world was a prison for the soul, and that only by unlocking the hidden wisdom of the divine could the soul be liberated. This belief in hidden knowledge, in secret wisdom, continued to thrive in the underground circles of early Christianity, even as the Church sought to suppress it. Over time, the Christian Church became the dominant force in Europe, but the belief in secret knowledge did not vanish. It went underground, taking root in the secret societies that would later emerge in the Middle Ages and beyond. In the Middle Ages, the idea of hidden knowledge and secret societies took on a new form with the rise of the alchemists, astrologers, and mystics who sought to unlock the secrets of the universe. Alchemy, which combined elements of chemistry, metallurgy, and mysticism, was viewed by many as a path to not just material wealth, but spiritual enlightenment. Alchemists believed that by understanding the secrets of the elements, they could transform the self and achieve a higher state of being. But alchemy was also about power, the power to transform not just materials but people and even entire societies. The search for the philosopher's stone, which could turn base metals into gold and grant eternal life, became the central focus of many alchemists' lives. It was a pursuit that, like the mystery religions of the past, promised both enlightenment and immense power. As the Renaissance dawned and Europe emerged from the Dark Ages, the belief in hidden knowledge experienced a revival. Intellectuals and scholars began to rediscover the ancient texts of Greece and Rome, including the writings of the early alchemists, philosophers, and mystics. This revival of interest in ancient wisdom laid the groundwork for the rise of secret societies like the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, groups that claimed to be the inheritors of the ancient wisdom passed down from the Egyptians and the Greeks. These societies, while often seen as organizations dedicated to moral and spiritual improvement, were also deeply involved in the pursuit of power. They understood the value of knowledge as a tool for influence, and they carefully guarded their teachings from the outside world. By the time the Enlightenment era arrived, the idea of secret knowledge had taken on an even more dangerous dimension. The Enlightenment thinkers, while advocating for reason and scientific inquiry, were also deeply interested in the occult and esoteric traditions. Figures like Isaac Newton, who is often considered the father of modern science, were also fascinated by alchemy and the hidden aspects of reality. For these intellectuals, the pursuit of knowledge was not just about understanding the world, it was about controlling it. And as the world began to change, so too did the role of secret societies and occult knowledge in shaping history. What began as a search for enlightenment had long since transformed into a struggle for control, a battle over who could claim the secrets of the universe and use them to shape the destiny of humankind. The rise of these secret societies marked a turning point in history, one that would shape the course of events for centuries to come. The dawn of organized knowledge and the rise of secretive power structures were marked by one crucial element: betrayal. The very nature of the knowledge being sought, guarded, and passed down carried within it a dangerous potential, the potential to corrupt those who sought to wield it. This corruption, however, did not happen overnight. It was a slow, insidious process that crept into the very fabric of societies that had once considered knowledge a sacred trust. As ancient cultures placed their most profound wisdom in the hands of a select few, those individuals, priests, scribes, and philosophers, were granted power. This power was not just intellectual but spiritual, and with it came the responsibility to protect and preserve the sacred teachings for the betterment of all. Yet, it wasn't long before some of these very custodians of knowledge began to bend the wisdom they had inherited to serve their own desires. The Egyptian priests, who once served as the protectors of divine wisdom, exemplified the earliest instances of such betrayal. Egypt, with its ancient and intricate religious system, was a culture that revered knowledge above all else. The priests were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, privy to the sacred mysteries of the afterlife and the workings of the universe. The wisdom they possessed was not merely for practical use. It was believed to be divinely inspired and therefore untouchable by the hands of ordinary men. The priests, in their power, were the keepers of sacred texts and esoteric knowledge that had been passed down for generations. They controlled the temples, which served not only as centers of worship but as institutions of learning. The political system in Egypt was intricately tied to the religious order, with the pharaohs themselves seen as gods on earth. However, as the years passed and the grip of Egypt's ruling dynasties began to weaken, so too did the moral fortitude of the priesthood. The sacred knowledge they held, intended to unify and guide society, began to be manipulated. The priests who once acted as the protectors of wisdom started using their position for personal gain. This shift was subtle at first but grew more evident over time. The priesthood began to consolidate power in their own hands, controlling not just religious life but the very essence of Egypt's political landscape. Pharaohs, who once held supreme power, found themselves at the mercy of the priestly class. What had once been a divine relationship between the ruler and the gods now became a struggle for control over the divine knowledge itself. The priests, who were meant to serve, began to rule in their own right. They became the puppet masters, pulling the strings of the pharaoh's reign. This betrayal of sacred knowledge was not limited to the Egyptian priesthood. As Greek philosophy began to take root and expand, a similar process of corruption unfolded. The great philosophers of Greece, revered for their intellectual prowess and spiritual insights, were not immune to the temptations of power. Plato's Academy, a bastion of knowledge and learning, espoused noble ideals about the pursuit of wisdom and the nature of justice. Yet, like the Egyptian priesthood before them, the Greek philosophers recognized the power that lay in controlling knowledge. Plato's ideal philosopher king was a figure who would rule not through force, but through wisdom, an enlightened ruler who could guide the state with intellect rather than brute strength. But this very ideal, rooted in the belief that wisdom was the highest form of power, contained the seed of its own corruption. For if knowledge could elevate a ruler to the highest station, what was to stop rulers from using that knowledge to keep others beneath them? The ancient mystery schools of Greece, like those of Pythagoras and the Eleusinian mysteries, further complicated the relationship between knowledge and power. These schools, which sought to uncover the hidden truths of the universe, were founded on the idea that only a select few were worthy of receiving the highest knowledge. Initiates went through elaborate rituals and ceremonies designed to purify them and allow them to transcend the ordinary world. These rituals were shrouded in secrecy, and the knowledge revealed to initiates was kept hidden from the uninitiated. The elite, those who had access to this sacred knowledge, gained not only spiritual enlightenment but worldly power. The knowledge of the universe, knowledge that could transform the individual and society, was now confined to a select group, carefully protected and manipulated. The very secrecy that surrounded these teachings became a tool of power, and the promise of enlightenment was often overshadowed by the reality of control. The corrupting influence of this secrecy and power did not stop with the Greeks. With the rise of the Roman Empire, the cycle of betrayal continued, this time on an even grander scale. Rome, with its vast empire and complex political structure, was not only a military and economic powerhouse but also a center of learning and intellectual exchange. Roman scholars, philosophers, and statesmen were heavily influenced by Greek thought, and many of the great Roman figures, such as Julius Caesar, Augustus, and later the emperors, were deeply involved in the mystical and occult practices of the East. They sought to unlock the wisdom of the ancients, not only for personal enlightenment but as a means to consolidate and extend their power. The imperial cult, which deified the emperor and placed him at the center of the Roman religious system, was itself an extension of the idea that knowledge, specifically divine knowledge, could be used to control. Emperors like Augustus used their association with the gods to legitimize their rule, and the imperial priests, who controlled the religious apparatus of Rome, became some of the most powerful individuals in the empire. But as with the Egyptian priests before them, the line between spiritual guardianship and political manipulation became increasingly blurred. The emperors, who were once seen as divine representatives of the gods on earth, began to use their spiritual authority for personal and political gain. The emperors of Rome were not simply rulers, they were gods, and their subjects were required to worship them as such. The knowledge that had once been reserved for the initiated was now twisted to serve the political needs of those in power. But perhaps the most significant betrayal in the ancient world came with the rise of Christianity and the establishment of the Christian Church as the dominant force in Europe. In the early days of Christianity, The followers of Christ embraced the idea of a direct relationship with the divine, one that did not rely on intermediaries like priests or temples. This radical rejection of the traditional power structures of religion was at the heart of early Christian thought. Knowledge of God was meant to be open and accessible to all believers, not hidden behind the veil of an elite few. But as Christianity grew in influence and became the state religion of the Roman Empire under Emperor Constantine, the Church began to consolidate its own power. The Church, which had once preached the equality of all believers, now became the arbiter of divine knowledge. It was through the Church that the Bible was canonized, and it was through the Church that the mysteries of the faith were interpreted and disseminated. The clergy, who were supposed to serve the people, became the gatekeepers of knowledge, controlling what could and could not be known. In doing so, the Church, much like the priests of Egypt and the philosophers of Greece, began to use knowledge as a tool of control. The Church established its authority not just through its teachings but through its ability to dictate who could access the divine knowledge contained in the Bible. Heretics, those who challenged the official doctrines of the Church, were branded as enemies of God, and their ideas were suppressed. The very notion of forbidden knowledge, once something seen as a tool of spiritual enlightenment, became something dangerous and subversive. The Church's monopoly on divine knowledge meant that anyone who sought to uncover the truth outside of the Church's teachings was considered a threat to the established order. As the Middle Ages progressed, the Church's control over knowledge grew even more entrenched. The rise of monasticism saw the creation of massive libraries and scriptoria, where monks copied ancient manuscripts and preserved the knowledge of the past. But even within these institutions, knowledge was carefully regulated. The monks, while dedicated to the preservation of knowledge, were also committed to maintaining the authority of the Church. The knowledge they guarded was often viewed through the lens of religious doctrine, and any ideas that challenged the Church's teachings were suppressed. The idea of heretical knowledge became so potent that it was equated with dangerous, subversive forces. The Inquisition, a brutal campaign to root out heresy, was in part an attempt to control the flow of knowledge and to prevent the spread of ideas that could challenge the Church's authority. By the time the Renaissance arrived, the seeds of corruption sown by the betrayal of knowledge had blossomed into a full-blown struggle for control over the flow of information. The Renaissance, which saw a revival of interest in the classics of Greek and Roman thought, was also a time of great intellectual ferment. Humanists, scholars, and artists sought to unlock the secrets of the past, and their rediscovery of ancient texts brought with it the potential for a new era of enlightenment. However, as in the past, this new knowledge was not free from the temptations of power. The Church, still a powerful force in Europe, viewed the growing interest in classical thought with suspicion. And as the Protestant Reformation gained traction, the Church's stranglehold on knowledge was threatened. The control of sacred texts, particularly the Bible, became a central issue in the battle for religious and intellectual freedom. The betrayal of knowledge that began with the Egyptian priests and continued through the Greek philosophers, Roman emperors, and medieval churchmen was now entering a new phase. The very nature of knowledge had changed. It was no longer the sole domain of the elite. It was something that could be shared, spread, and disseminated to the masses. But as the flow of knowledge became more democratized, so too did the potential for its misuse. The struggle for control of knowledge had only just begun, and as history unfolded, it would become clear that those who sought power would always seek to control the most dangerous and coveted asset of all, the truth. The transformation of knowledge into a tool of power has been a consistent thread running through history, and as time passed, the control of this knowledge became even more intricately tied to the political, economic, and religious spheres of influence. With each new empire, intellectual movement, or cultural shift, those who held the secrets of the past found themselves in positions of immense power, power that often exceeded that of the monarchs or generals of their time. Knowledge, once intended for spiritual enlightenment or scientific discovery, was now seen as a commodity that could tip the scales of history. As the centuries passed, the line between wisdom and manipulation became increasingly difficult to discern. The knowledge that was once available only to a select few began to expand beyond the confines of the elite, yet its power to corrupt remained undiminished. The Renaissance, which marked the rebirth of learning and the rediscovery of classical texts, was a pivotal moment in the long-running battle over forbidden knowledge. In many ways, the Renaissance was a return to the ancient ideals of Greek philosophy and Roman thought, but it also saw the rise of new intellectual movements that sought to blend the old and the new. Humanism, with its emphasis on the potential for human achievement and the pursuit of knowledge, became the intellectual foundation for much of the period. It was during this time that the idea of the universal man, or the Renaissance man, began to emerge, a figure who could master multiple disciplines and who believed that knowledge was the key to unlocking the fullest potential of the human experience. The thirst for knowledge was no longer just about understanding the divine or the natural world. It was about self-realization, about achieving greatness through the acquisition and application of learning. But this explosion of intellectual activity was not without its dangers. As scholars and artists began to study the ancient texts, they were confronted not only with the wisdom of the ancients but also with the remnants of their secrets, knowledge that had been deliberately hidden or kept from the masses for fear of its corrupting influence. Among the most intriguing and dangerous of these secrets were the teachings of the alchemists. Alchemy, once a science focused on the transformation of base metals into gold, was deeply intertwined with mysticism, astrology, and the pursuit of eternal life. The alchemists believed that by unlocking the secrets of the universe, they could achieve both material and spiritual transformation. Their experiments were seen as both a quest for wealth and a search for divine knowledge. But the process of uncovering these secrets was fraught with peril. Alchemists were often seen as dangerous figures, wielding knowledge that could not only change the course of individual lives but reshape entire societies. The alchemists' influence was not limited to their arcane practices. Their work inspired a new generation of thinkers who sought to understand the hidden forces of nature and the universe. Figures like Isaac Newton, one of the founding fathers of modern science, were not just concerned with the laws of physics or mathematics. They were also deeply immersed in the occult and alchemical traditions. Newton himself, often regarded as the father of modern science, spent a significant portion of his life studying alchemy, seeking to uncover the hidden principles of the cosmos that he believed were crucial to understanding the natural world. This blending of scientific inquiry with mystical exploration marked a pivotal moment in the development of Western thought. The very foundation of modern science, with its reliance on observation, experimentation, and empirical data, was rooted in a tradition of secret knowledge and hidden wisdom. And as these ancient practices were resurrected during the Renaissance, they would have profound implications for the future of both science and society. However, it was not just the pursuit of material wealth or scientific discovery that drove the intellectual movements of the time. The Renaissance also saw the rise of secret societies, groups that believed that knowledge, in its most profound and transformative form, needed to be kept hidden from the general public. The most famous of these societies was the Freemasons, a brotherhood that traced its roots back to the medieval guilds of stonemasons. While the Freemasons initially focused on the craft of stonemasonry, their teachings eventually expanded to include esoteric knowledge, drawing from ancient Egyptian, Greek, and mystical traditions. The Freemasons became known for their secret rituals, symbols, and teachings, many of which were rooted in the occult. To be initiated into their ranks was to gain access to a hidden world of knowledge that was thought to be beyond the grasp of ordinary men. The rise of these secret societies during the Renaissance was a direct response to the growing power of the Catholic Church. The Church, which had long been the central authority in Europe, was seen by many as a corrupt institution that controlled knowledge for its own gain. The Church had long maintained a monopoly over religious knowledge, and its priests and scholars were often the only ones who had access to the sacred texts of Christianity. This monopoly on knowledge was seen by many as a form of intellectual enslavement. As the Renaissance unfolded, thinkers and intellectuals began to challenge the Church's authority, questioning not only its teachings but its control over knowledge itself. The rise of secret societies was, in part, a reaction to this perceived corruption. These societies promised to reveal knowledge that had been hidden by the Church for centuries, knowledge that could potentially free humanity from the shackles of religious dogma. However, this rebellion against the Church and the desire for greater intellectual freedom soon gave way to a new form of control. As secret societies grew in influence, they began to exert their own power over the dissemination of knowledge. What had begun as an attempt to break free from the monopoly of the church became a struggle for control over who would have access to the most valuable knowledge of all. The very secrecy that these societies had once used to protect knowledge now became a means of controlling it. Those who were initiated into these societies gained access to a hidden world of ideas, rituals, and wisdom that was reserved for the select few. The promise of enlightenment and liberation through knowledge was often overshadowed by the reality of power dynamics and exclusivity. As these societies grew more powerful, they began to play a crucial role in shaping the political and cultural landscapes of Europe. One of the most important secret societies to emerge during this period was the Rosicrucians. Founded in the early 17th century, the Rosicrucian movement was an attempt to bring together the best aspects of alchemy, mysticism, and scientific knowledge. The Rosicrucians believed that they had discovered the secret to unlocking the true nature of reality, and that this knowledge could bring about a new era of enlightenment. The movement gained significant popularity in Europe, attracting scholars, scientists, and intellectuals who were eager to uncover the hidden truths of the universe. However, like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians also kept their teachings secret, only allowing initiates to gain access to their most profound knowledge. The secrecy surrounding their work gave the Rosicrucians an air of mystery and intrigue, and their influence spread throughout Europe, particularly in intellectual circles. Despite their claims to offer a path to enlightenment, the Rosicrucians and other secret societies often operated in a way that was no different from the church or the state in terms of controlling access to knowledge. These societies may have promised to liberate humanity from the constraints of ignorance and superstition, but in reality, they only replaced one form of control with another. The idea of secret knowledge, once meant to be a tool for spiritual awakening, had become a tool for power and manipulation. Those who held the keys to this knowledge were able to shape the destinies of nations, influence the direction of intellectual thought, and, in some cases, determine the fate of individuals. As the Enlightenment emerged in the 18th century, the pursuit of knowledge reached new heights. Intellectuals and philosophers sought to free themselves from the constraints of religious dogma and explore the world through reason and scientific inquiry. Figures like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Kant challenged the authority of the church and monarchies, advocating for a new world order based on reason, liberty, and equality. The Enlightenment was a time of unprecedented intellectual growth, and for many, it represented the culmination of centuries of intellectual labor. But even as the Enlightenment celebrated reason and rationality, it was also deeply influenced by the secret societies and occult traditions that had come before it. The ideas of the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and alchemists continued to shape the intellectual landscape of the time, as thinkers grappled with the relationship between knowledge, power, and spirituality. It was during this period that the modern idea of forbidden knowledge began to take shape. As secret societies like the Freemasons continued to flourish, the notion that there were certain types of knowledge that should be kept hidden from the masses gained traction. The idea of the illuminated few, who possessed access to esoteric knowledge that could change the course of history, became a central theme in the intellectual world. Knowledge, once a means of spiritual awakening, had now become a tool for social and political revolution. Those who controlled this knowledge were the ones who had the power to shape the future, and this power was not to be taken lightly. By the time the 19th century arrived, the battle for control over forbidden knowledge was well underway. The rise of science, technology, and industrialization brought with it new challenges and opportunities. But as society became more advanced, the stakes surrounding knowledge only grew higher. The pursuit of knowledge was no longer confined to the intellectual elite. It had become a global endeavor, with scientists, philosophers, and politicians all vying for control over the most valuable asset of all, truth. In this new world, knowledge was no longer just about enlightenment. It was about power, influence, and control. The battle for forbidden knowledge had entered a new phase, one in which the stakes were higher than ever before. As the centuries advanced, the concept of forbidden knowledge continued to evolve, transcending its ancient roots and becoming intertwined with the fabric of modernity. The intellectual movements of the Renaissance, Enlightenment, and Industrial Revolution created a new paradigm of thought, one that was far more expansive in its reach but no less mysterious in its consequences. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason and scientific inquiry, promised a world where knowledge would be accessible to all, liberated from the grip of superstition, dogma, and religious control. However, even in this new age of reason, the desire for hidden truths, for knowledge that existed just beyond the grasp of ordinary men, continued to pervade the intellectual and spiritual currents of Europe. The growing divide between the enlightened and the uninitiated remained, and in many ways, it only grew more pronounced. At the heart of this new intellectual climate was the idea that knowledge had the power to shape not just individual lives, but the very course of history. The Age of Enlightenment promised that through reason, scientific discovery, and the application of logic, humanity would escape the darkness of ignorance. Thinkers like Immanuel Kant, John Locke, and René Descartes championed the idea that reason could illuminate the world and solve the mysteries that had long eluded mankind. The scientific method, which emphasized observation, experimentation, and evidence-based conclusions, became the driving force of intellectual exploration. But even within this rational framework, there were those who believed that there were deeper, more mystical truths hidden behind the veil of the natural world, truths that reason alone could not uncover. These hidden truths would not only remain inaccessible to the masses, but would continue to be guarded by secret societies, occult traditions, and esoteric knowledge keepers. As the Enlightenment unfolded, there emerged a new kind of intellectual elite, those who held the keys to both reason and the ancient mysteries. The most prominent of these groups was the Freemasons, a secretive and influential society whose roots stretched back to medieval guilds of stonemasons. The Freemasons' creed was based on the pursuit of moral and spiritual enlightenment, but their secret rituals, symbols, and teachings carried a more profound undercurrent. The Freemasons believed that true knowledge was not only about moral improvement but also about uncovering the hidden forces that govern the universe. Their teachings, which blended elements of alchemy, mysticism, and ancient wisdom, were considered by many to be the embodiment of forbidden knowledge. But this knowledge was not freely given. The Freemasons, much like the priests of ancient Egypt or the philosophers of Greece, held their wisdom in secret, only granting access to those deemed worthy through initiation and careful selection. The idea that knowledge could be used as a form of social and political control became central to the Freemasons' philosophy. The society's hierarchical structure, with its secret handshakes, passwords, and rituals, was designed not only to impart moral teachings, but to solidify bonds of loyalty and power among its members. While outwardly focused on philanthropy and social improvement, the Freemasons were also deeply involved in political and intellectual circles. Many of the most influential figures of the Enlightenment, including Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, and Voltaire, were members of the Masonic Lodge. For these men, the Freemasons provided not just a social network but a platform for disseminating ideas that could reshape the world. The knowledge they possessed, however, was not meant to be shared with the general public. It was, and still is, a closely guarded secret, passed down through generations of initiates. The secrecy surrounding the Freemasons added to their allure and mystique, and it was this very secrecy that made them the target of suspicion, conspiracy, and intrigue. In many ways, the Freemasons were the intellectual heirs of the ancient mystery schools. Just as the Egyptians had concealed their sacred knowledge behind temple walls, just as the Greeks had held their metaphysical teachings for a select few, the Freemasons continued this tradition of keeping knowledge hidden from the uninitiated. But in contrast to the exclusive religious and mystical societies of the past, the Freemasons were grounded in the principles of Enlightenment thinking. They believed that through education and self-improvement, individuals could achieve a higher state of moral and intellectual development. However, beneath the surface of this idealistic philosophy lay a more pragmatic purpose: control. The knowledge that the Freemasons sought to protect was not just intellectual, it was also political. The society's influence extended into the halls of power, and its members were involved in the shaping of governments, both in Europe and the Americas. The rise of secret societies like the Freemasons marked a turning point in the relationship between knowledge and power. No longer was knowledge confined to the temple or the academy. It had become a tool of governance. The Freemasons, with their extensive network of members, were able to influence the political landscape of Europe and the Americas, often behind the scenes. They believed that only those who had access to their teachings could understand the deeper forces at work in the world, and Therefore, only those who had undergone their initiation rites were equipped to lead. This idea of enlightened rule was central to their philosophy. The Freemasons, however, were not alone in their quest for hidden knowledge. At the same time that the Freemasons were gaining influence, other secret societies and occult traditions were also flourishing. The Rosicrucians, for instance, emerged as a rival to the Freemasons in the 17th century. The Rosicrucians were a mystical order that combined elements of alchemy, Christian mysticism, and ancient wisdom. They believed that they possessed the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe, a knowledge that could bring about a new age of enlightenment and spiritual renewal. Like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians guarded their teachings closely, only allowing those who had undergone a series of initiations to gain access to their most profound insights. The secrecy surrounding the Rosicrucians added to their mystique, and many of the intellectual leaders of the Renaissance were drawn to their teachings. But while the Freemasons and Rosicrucians were focused on spiritual enlightenment and intellectual development, other secret societies were more overtly political in their aims. The Illuminati, founded in the late 18th century in Bavaria, sought to overthrow the established order and replace it with a new world order based on reason, secularism, and the rejection of religious dogma. The Illuminati's primary goal was to expose the hidden truths that they believed were being kept from the masses by religious and political institutions. Unlike the Freemasons and Rosicrucians, who had more esoteric aims, the Illuminati were openly revolutionary in their philosophy. They believed that by disseminating forbidden knowledge, they could bring about a radical transformation of society. The Illuminati's goals were to be achieved through education and the spread of Enlightenment ideals, but their methods were often clandestine and subversive. The Illuminati's rise to prominence, however, was short-lived. By the end of the 18th century, the group had been disbanded by the government, and many of its members were arrested or exiled. But the legacy of the Illuminati lived on, as their ideas and their methods were absorbed into the broader political and intellectual movements of the time. The idea of secret knowledge, once again, became a central theme in the struggle for power. What was clear was that the battle for forbidden knowledge had entered a new stage. The intellectual elite, now empowered by the scientific and philosophical advances of the Enlightenment, saw themselves as the true bearers of wisdom. However, this wisdom was no longer something to be shared with the masses. It had become a commodity, a tool of control. The French Revolution, which took place at the end of the 18th century, epitomized the struggle over forbidden knowledge. On the surface, the revolution was about overthrowing the monarchy and establishing a republic based on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But underneath this political upheaval lay a deeper battle over knowledge and its role in shaping society. The revolutionaries, many of whom were influenced by Enlightenment ideals, believed that the old order of kings and priests had kept the masses in ignorance for far too long. They sought to break the grip of the religious and political elites and replace them with a new system based on reason and secularism. However, the revolutionaries themselves became the new guardians of knowledge, using their power to control what could and could not be known. As the revolution progressed, it became clear that those who held the keys to knowledge, whether in the form of revolutionary ideology or scientific truth, held the power to shape the destiny of the nation. The rise of nationalism in the 19th century further complicated the relationship between knowledge and power. As European nations began to consolidate their power, they also began to cultivate national identities rooted in history, culture, and knowledge. The control of historical narratives and the interpretation of national myths became a crucial tool for maintaining power. Leaders and intellectuals sought to shape the collective memory of their nations, crafting stories that glorified the past and justified the present. But these narratives were often selective and manipulated, omitting inconvenient truths and presenting a version of history that suited the needs of those in power. The battle over forbidden knowledge, once a personal pursuit of intellectual or spiritual enlightenment, had now become a political struggle for control over the past, present, and future. As the 20th century dawned, the role of knowledge in shaping global power became even more pronounced. The advent of new technologies such as the radio, the telephone, and eventually the internet allowed for the rapid dissemination of information. The battle for knowledge was no longer confined to intellectual elites or secret societies. The rise of mass media created new opportunities for knowledge to be shared or manipulated on a global scale. The control of information, once the preserve of a select few, now became a matter of international importance. And as the century progressed, it became increasingly clear that the struggle for forbidden knowledge was no longer a battle between individual societies or intellectual groups. It had become a global conflict, one in which the control of knowledge had the power to shape the future of humanity itself. The legacy of the struggle for forbidden knowledge continues to shape our world today. The pursuit of hidden truths, the desire to uncover the mysteries of the universe, and the need to control knowledge remain as potent as ever. As technology advances and new forms of knowledge are discovered, the question remains: who will control the secrets of the universe, and what will they do with that power? The fight for forbidden knowledge is far from over. It is, in many ways, only just beginning. In the midst of the changing tides of power, one aspect remained constant: the insatiable hunger for hidden knowledge. As societies moved into the modern era, the boundaries between science, mysticism, politics, and religion blurred even further, creating a complex web of competing interests. The battle for control of knowledge was no longer confined to secret societies, alchemists, or ancient religious orders. Now it involved new institutions, intellectual movements, and even entire nations vying to safeguard or exploit the most coveted of resources: information. As the Industrial Revolution gave birth to new technological wonders, the very tools that could empower individuals with knowledge also made that knowledge easier to manipulate and conceal. At the heart of the struggle was the scientific revolution, which promised a new world order based on empirical observation, experimentation, and the application of reason. Yet, while the advances in physics, chemistry, and biology heralded a brighter future, they also created a paradox. As scientific knowledge expanded, so did the capacity for its manipulation. The discovery of electricity, the development of vaccines, the harnessing of steam power, all of these innovations brought unprecedented progress, but they also set the stage for the rise of technologies that could be used to control, monitor, and shape public opinion. This dichotomy, the promise of enlightenment through knowledge, juxtaposed against the ever-present danger of its exploitation, became a central theme in the modern world's ongoing battle for forbidden knowledge. One of the most dramatic turning points in the struggle over knowledge came during the early 20th century, with the advent of totalitarian regimes and the rise of mass media. In many ways, the 20th century can be seen as the culmination of centuries of intellectual, political, and technological upheaval. The arrival of radio, television, and eventually the internet opened up new possibilities for information to be shared on an unprecedented scale. Yet, as these technologies became more pervasive, they also revealed the darker side of knowledge control. Governments, corporations, and secretive organizations now had the power to influence not just the distribution of information, but the very way in which knowledge was constructed and consumed. The manipulation of the truth became an increasingly sophisticated art. In Nazi Germany, for example, Joseph Goebbels and his propaganda ministry harnessed the power of radio and film to spread the ideology of the Third Reich, creating a carefully curated version of reality that would become the basis for one of the most horrific regimes in history. Knowledge, once a tool for personal and collective enlightenment, was turned into a weapon to control the masses. The regime's grip on knowledge was absolute. Historical facts were twisted to fit the narrative of Aryan supremacy. Scientific discoveries were bent to support racist ideologies, and the very concept of truth became distorted. The people were no longer the masters of their knowledge. Instead, they became slaves to a manufactured reality, built on lies and distortion. The Nazis understood better than anyone the power that knowledge, specifically controlled knowledge, could wield. It was not just a matter of having the facts. It was a matter of shaping how the facts were perceived, who could access them, and what conclusions were drawn from them. While totalitarian regimes used propaganda to control knowledge, capitalist societies faced their own challenges in the battle for information. In the early 20th century, the rise of multinational corporations introduced a new player into the arena of knowledge control. Companies like General Electric, Standard Oil, and later, tech giants like Google and Facebook understood that information was not only a valuable commodity but also a means of exerting power. Corporations began to use advertising, public relations, and market research to shape public perceptions, creating an entirely new kind of knowledge. Knowledge that was designed to manipulate, sell, and control. Information was no longer just about facts. It became about perception, about crafting narratives that would sway public opinion and drive consumer behavior. The rise of consumer culture, fueled by the development of mass media, created a new form of information warfare. Advertising, once a simple tool to promote products, evolved into a sophisticated science. It was no longer just about selling a product. It was about selling an idea, a lifestyle, a vision of the world. Brands like Coca-Cola, Apple, and Nike built empires not just by selling goods, but by creating a reality that people would buy into. They understood that the greatest power lay in the control of knowledge. Not just the knowledge of how to make a product, but the knowledge of how to make people want it. The battle for control over this knowledge would shape the consumer economy, and in turn, the political landscape of the 20th and 21st centuries. Yet, as these new forms of knowledge manipulation took hold, there were those who continued to believe in the power of knowledge to bring about enlightenment and social change. The intellectuals, scientists, and revolutionaries of the early 20th century, figures like Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, and Karl Marx, believed that the true power of knowledge lay in its ability to transform society for the better. They saw knowledge not as a tool of control, but as a means of liberation. For Marx, the control of knowledge was a class struggle, and those who controlled the means of knowledge production also controlled the means of social power. Freud saw the unconscious mind as a vast reservoir of untapped knowledge that, once unlocked, could lead to personal liberation. Einstein, in his pursuit of a unified theory of physics, believed that the universe held deep, hidden truths that, once understood, would revolutionize humanity's relationship with the cosmos. For these thinkers, knowledge was something to be uncovered, to be liberated from the confines of established power structures. They believed that by revealing the truths of the world, whether through the lens of science, psychology, or political theory, they could create a more just and enlightened society. Yet, despite their idealism, these intellectuals were also aware of the power that knowledge could wield when it fell into the wrong hands. Marx's critique of capitalism, Freud's exploration of human desires, and Einstein's theories of relativity all revealed the ways in which knowledge could be used to control or shape human behavior. The very pursuit of knowledge, they argued, carried with it the potential for exploitation and manipulation. As the 20th century progressed, the rapid development of technology and the spread of information networks brought new challenges to the struggle for forbidden knowledge. The invention of the atomic bomb during World War II represented perhaps the most dramatic example of how knowledge, once thought to be a tool for human progress, could be turned into a weapon of mass destruction. The development of nuclear technology was hailed as a breakthrough in scientific understanding, a testament to humanity's ability to harness the forces of nature. But as the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it became clear that knowledge, when wielded irresponsibly, could bring about unimaginable devastation. The question of who should control such powerful knowledge, and for what purpose, became a central ethical dilemma of the 20th century. In the decades that followed, the advent of computers, the internet, and digital technologies brought a new dimension to the battle for knowledge. The rise of the internet, in particular, promised to democratize knowledge, making information accessible to anyone with a computer. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the control of knowledge was shifting away from traditional power structures and into the hands of the people. The internet allowed for the rapid dissemination of ideas, and it created new spaces for individuals to share knowledge and engage in dialogue. However, this newfound freedom also brought with it new dangers. The very same technologies that allowed for the sharing of knowledge also allowed for its distortion, manipulation, and censorship. The proliferation of fake news, conspiracy theories, and misinformation became a major issue in the 21st century. The internet, once heralded as the great equalizer, became a battleground for competing narratives and alternative truths. Governments, corporations, and individuals began using digital platforms to shape public perception, control the flow of information, and suppress dissenting voices. The question of who controls the digital platforms, who controls the flow of information, became one of the most pressing issues of the modern age. The battle for knowledge had shifted into a new realm, one where the boundaries between truth and falsehood, fact and fiction, were increasingly difficult to discern. At the same time, the growing influence of artificial intelligence added a new layer of complexity to the struggle over forbidden knowledge. As AI systems became more advanced, they began to process vast amounts of data, uncover patterns and insights that were once hidden from human understanding, and even make decisions that would affect the lives of millions. The potential of AI to revolutionize industries, from healthcare to finance to transportation, was immense. But with this power came new questions about control, autonomy, and ethics. As AI systems became more autonomous, the line between knowledge and power blurred even further. Who would be responsible for the knowledge that AI systems generated? And more importantly, who would control the decision-making process? The struggle for forbidden knowledge, once confined to the realms of secret societies and intellectual elites, had now become a global and technological battle. As the 21st century unfolded, the control of knowledge was no longer just about controlling books, manuscripts, or even scientific discoveries. It was about controlling the flow of data, the narratives we consume, and the very algorithms that govern our lives. And as we move further into the digital age, the question remains, who will control the knowledge of the future, and what will they do with it? The quest for forbidden knowledge has always been intertwined with the human desire for power, control, and understanding. As societies evolved, so too did the methods through which this knowledge was safeguarded, hidden, and sometimes even twisted. The interplay between knowledge and power is not a modern phenomenon. It dates back to the earliest civilizations, where rulers and intellectual elites held secrets that were seen as dangerous, mystical, or capable of altering the course of history. But as time moved forward, especially in the 20th and 21st centuries, the battle for control over knowledge took on a new dimension, as access to information became more democratized, yet paradoxically more easily manipulated. The shifting landscape of power created an environment where knowledge, instead of being a tool for enlightenment, became a weapon, capable of being used to divide, deceive, or even destroy. In the early stages of modern history, the control of knowledge was primarily in the hands of a few, the monarchy, the church, and a small group of intellectual elites. These institutions understood the importance of controlling the flow of information, for knowledge gave them the ability to shape reality. Whether it was the medieval church, which dictated religious truths and controlled access to sacred texts, or the monarchs who shaped the political and social systems of their kingdoms, power and knowledge were inseparable. The dissemination of knowledge, particularly religious knowledge, was a means of control. The church held the keys to salvation, and through its teachings, it told people what to believe, how to live, and even what to fear. The monarchs, likewise, used knowledge to justify their rule and keep the populace in check. The historical role of these institutions in guarding knowledge was based on the belief that the masses could not be trusted with certain truths. They were too dangerous, too subversive. To reveal such knowledge to the general public would risk undermining the established order. However, as the Renaissance blossomed and new ideas began to take root, the monopoly on knowledge started to erode. The printing press, invented in the mid-15th century, was a revolutionary technological advancement that allowed for the mass production of books, pamphlets, and other written materials. This was the first true democratization of knowledge. For the first time, people could access texts that had previously been restricted to a privileged few. The spread of knowledge, whether scientific, philosophical, or theological, became far more accessible. The Protestant Reformation, driven by figures like Martin Luther, was a direct response to the Church's control over religious knowledge. Luther's translation of the Bible into German allowed ordinary people to read and interpret Scripture for themselves, challenging the monopoly the Church had held on religious interpretation. But even as knowledge became more widely available, it was still bound by the same forces of power and control. The elites of the time, the intellectuals, the clergy, and the nobility, understood that this democratization of knowledge could be both empowering and destabilizing. The fear of knowledge, especially knowledge that had the potential to challenge the status quo, persisted. The Church, for example, would go on to target not only individuals who dared challenge its authority, like Galileo Galilei, but also entire bodies of knowledge that contradicted its teachings. The Catholic Inquisition, which sought to suppress heresy, was as much about maintaining control over knowledge as it was about enforcing religious doctrine. The burning of books, the silencing of dissenting voices, and the persecution of thinkers who questioned established truths were all part of the Church's strategy to maintain power. The same tactics would be mirrored by political regimes, as rulers saw knowledge as a threat to their control over the masses. In the modern age, particularly in the 20th century, the balance of power shifted again, but this time the struggle over knowledge became even more intricate and widespread. With the advent of mass media and later, digital technology, information could spread across the globe at an unprecedented speed. The rise of radio, television, and eventually the internet created a new kind of battlefield for knowledge. Governments, corporations, and individuals alike began to realize the power of media and communication in shaping public perception. The ability to control the narrative, to filter what people could see, hear, and read, was a form of power in itself. Propaganda, once a tool used only by totalitarian regimes, became a universal method of controlling information. In countries with free press, corporate entities or political figures used the media to advance their agendas, shaping how stories were told and what facts were presented. The manipulation of public perception became a sophisticated art form, with information carefully curated and presented to serve specific interests. In the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, such as Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, the government took control of all forms of communication. Under Joseph Goebbels, Nazi Germany used radio broadcasts, films, and newspapers to shape public opinion, broadcasting a single, monolithic narrative that excluded any dissenting voices. The government controlled not only the dissemination of knowledge but also the very interpretation of it. History was rewritten to fit the ideological needs of the regime, and any form of dissent was silenced. Books were burned, intellectuals were persecuted, and anyone who sought to expose the hidden truths about the regime was either imprisoned or executed. In such regimes, forbidden knowledge was not just about scientific discoveries or philosophical ideas. It was about the very ability to see the world as it truly was. In the Soviet Union, a similar process took place. The government not only controlled the dissemination of information but also controlled the very production of knowledge itself. Scientists, writers, and intellectuals were forced to conform to the ideological demands of the state. Works of literature, historical accounts, and scientific theories that did not align with Marxist-Leninist doctrine were suppressed. The government even sought to control the way knowledge was disseminated in the educational system, ensuring that students were taught a version of history and science that served the political objectives of the state. Those who dared to challenge this narrative were branded as counter-revolutionaries, and their work was either suppressed or rewritten. In both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, knowledge was a tool for control, and those who controlled it wielded immense power over the minds and hearts of the people. However, in the latter half of the 20th century, as the internet emerged and digital technologies revolutionized communication, the flow of knowledge began to shift again. The rise of the internet allowed for a new kind of democratization of information. For the first time, knowledge could be shared globally without the constraints of censorship or the limitations of traditional media. With the click of a button, anyone could access information on virtually any topic, from scientific research to political analysis to historical documents. The internet seemed to promise a future where knowledge would be truly accessible to all, where people would no longer be at the mercy of governments, corporations, or religious institutions when it came to learning about the world. But the reality of the digital age proved far more complex. While the internet opened up new possibilities for the free exchange of ideas, it also brought with it new challenges. The same technologies that allowed for the democratization of knowledge also allowed for the manipulation and distortion of information on an unprecedented scale. The rise of social media platforms, search engines, and digital news outlets meant that the flow of information was now in the hands of a few powerful corporations. These platforms, designed to capture attention and drive engagement, prioritized content that was sensational, emotional, or divisive, often at the expense of truth. Fake news, misinformation, and conspiracy theories spread rapidly across the internet, as algorithms designed to promote content based on popularity allowed falsehoods to gain traction. In this new environment, the battle for control over knowledge was no longer just about governments or intellectual elites. It was about the tech giants who controlled the platforms through which information was shared. While some saw the rise of digital technology as a triumph for knowledge, others recognized the dangers it posed. As the internet grew, so too did the power of the entities that controlled it. Corporations like Google, Facebook, and Amazon amassed vast amounts of data on individuals, shaping not only what they saw but how they thought. Algorithms designed to curate content based on individual preferences created filter bubbles, where people were exposed only to information that confirmed their existing beliefs. This created an environment where knowledge was not a shared resource but a fragmented one, tailored to serve the interests of the powerful. Those who controlled the flow of information could now shape entire societies, influencing elections, public opinion, and even the way people viewed themselves and their place in the world. The manipulation of knowledge in the digital age is perhaps best exemplified by the phenomenon of alternative facts and the rise of post-truth politics. In a world where information can be distorted, spun, or outright fabricated, the very concept of truth becomes malleable. Political figures, social movements, and corporations use this fluidity to their advantage, creating alternate realities where the boundaries between fact and fiction are increasingly difficult to discern. The pursuit of forbidden knowledge, once a noble endeavor to uncover hidden truths, has now become a battleground for control over reality itself. Who controls the narrative? Who decides what is true and what is false? These questions have become central to the modern struggle for knowledge. As we continue to move deeper into the digital age, the future of knowledge remains uncertain. The very technologies that promise to liberate us have created new forms of control and manipulation. The struggle for forbidden knowledge, now more than ever, is a struggle for the truth, a truth that is increasingly difficult to find, let alone control. In this new world, the line between knowledge and power is blurrier than ever. And as we move forward, it becomes ever more apparent that the battle for control of knowledge is not just a matter of what we know. It's about who gets to define reality. The notion of forbidden knowledge has long been linked with both intellectual curiosity and the darker sides of human ambition. It has been the thread weaving together the great mysteries of our time, spanning from the sacred texts of ancient civilizations to the cutting-edge scientific breakthroughs of the present day. For centuries, knowledge was not something easily obtained or shared with the masses. It was a commodity that had to be earned, protected, and often concealed from those deemed unworthy or dangerous. Knowledge, particularly knowledge that could shake the foundations of power, was always a double-edged sword. While it held the potential to illuminate, to elevate the mind, and to challenge accepted truths, it also carried the power to destabilize the status quo, to provoke fear, and to inspire those in power to conceal or distort it. In the modern era, this dynamic only grew more complex. As the 19th and 20th centuries saw the rise of industrialization, globalization, and, most significantly, the proliferation of mass media, the power structures that once guarded knowledge now found themselves in a different kind of battle. The sheer volume of information and the rapid pace of technological progress meant that controlling knowledge was no longer a matter of censoring books or manipulating religious doctrines. Now, it was about controlling the means by which information was produced, consumed, and disseminated. And the fight for forbidden knowledge became less about secrecy and more about who could influence, manipulate, or obscure the flow of information for their own gain. The advent of mass communication technologies, beginning with the telegraph, the radio, and later television, fundamentally transformed the landscape of knowledge. These innovations allowed for the rapid transmission of information across vast distances, making it possible for ideas, theories, and facts to reach the far corners of the globe almost instantaneously. The power of the printed word had long been understood, but now, with the power of sound and moving images, knowledge could be more persuasive, more emotive, and, perhaps more importantly, more controllable. The radio and television became not just tools for entertainment, but for political manipulation, shaping public opinion, creating propaganda, and even altering the course of history itself. In the early 20th century, as totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia took hold, the control of knowledge became a cornerstone of their power. Governments realized that the ability to influence the hearts and minds of the masses was an essential part of maintaining control. In these regimes, knowledge was not merely a tool for governance, it became an instrument of oppression. In Nazi Germany, for example, the state's control over knowledge was absolute. Education, media, and even the arts were placed under the strictest scrutiny to ensure that they adhered to the ideological line of the Third Reich. Books were burned, historical records were altered, and films were used to disseminate propaganda that furthered the narrative of Aryan supremacy. The state also manipulated science, using it as a tool for ideological ends. Pseudosciences such as eugenics were given a veneer of respectability, backed by the authority of scientific knowledge. It was an unsettling example of how knowledge could be twisted, distorted, and used for malevolent purposes. The Nazis understood the tremendous power of information, of knowledge, and used it not just as a tool of control but as a weapon, shaping the beliefs and values of the population. The idea that knowledge could be used in this way was nothing new, but the speed and scale at which it could be disseminated, thanks to new media technologies, were unprecedented. In the Soviet Union, a similar pattern emerged. Joseph Stalin's regime manipulated not only the physical existence of knowledge but also its very nature. History was rewritten to serve the needs of the Communist Party, and any intellectual who dared challenge the official narrative was silenced. The regime's control over education, literature, and the press allowed it to enforce a single, unified view of reality. Scientists who contradicted the Marxist-Leninist interpretation of the world were purged, and dissident thinkers were sent into exile or executed. The totalitarian control over knowledge was not just about censoring inconvenient facts but also about creating a new kind of truth, one that could be shaped and molded by the state itself. The very process of knowing became politicized, as the state took it upon itself to determine what could be known and what could not. These examples of state control over knowledge highlighted one of the most chilling aspects of forbidden knowledge in the modern era: the ability to manipulate not just what people know but how they think. In the 20th century, knowledge became increasingly associated with power and propaganda. While totalitarian regimes sought to control knowledge for political gain, capitalist democracies, too, found themselves wrestling with the complexities of information control. The growth of multinational corporations and the rise of advertising, public relations, and mass marketing added another layer to the battle for knowledge. In this new age of consumerism, the knowledge that corporations sought to control was not about the pursuit of truth or enlightenment. It was about shaping perceptions, creating desires, and guiding behavior. The rise of advertising in the early 20th century was a revolutionary moment in the battle for knowledge. Companies like Coca-Cola, General Motors, and later tech giants such as Apple and Google realized that the knowledge people had about their products, their brands, and their lifestyles could influence consumer behavior on a massive scale. Advertising became a science, a calculated effort to shape the way people thought about the world. It was no longer about informing people, it was about convincing them. By controlling the narrative surrounding their products, brands, and lifestyles, corporations began to shape the desires and choices of entire populations. The line between information and manipulation began to blur, as the creation of knowledge became synonymous with the creation of demand. In the second half of the 20th century, as digital technologies revolutionized the flow of information, the control of knowledge entered a new phase. The Internet, while initially hailed as the great equalizer of information, became another arena for control. The rise of search engines, social media platforms, and digital news outlets gave individuals unprecedented access to knowledge. Yet, at the same time, it also opened the door to new forms of manipulation. The algorithms that drive search engines and social media platforms determine what information is most visible to users, shaping not only the kinds of knowledge they have access to but also the way in which they perceive the world. In this digital age, the battle for forbidden knowledge is no longer just about books, films, or radio broadcasts. It is about data, the information that individuals and corporations gather about people's behaviors, preferences, and interactions on the Internet has become one of the most valuable forms of knowledge in the modern world. Data is power. The knowledge about what people buy, what they like, who they talk to, and how they think is being harnessed by corporations, governments, and even individuals to influence behavior on a massive scale. Algorithms, designed to personalize content and advertisements, have the power to subtly shift opinions, shape political ideologies, and even sway elections. The proliferation of fake news and conspiracy theories is a direct consequence of this new environment. As knowledge becomes increasingly personalized and filtered through algorithms, it becomes easier for people to be exposed only to information that reinforces their existing beliefs. This creates echo chambers, where individuals are surrounded by like-minded views and are less likely to encounter alternative perspectives. In this world of hyper-personalized information, the truth is no longer objective. It is subjective, malleable, and easily manipulated. The very idea of what constitutes forbidden knowledge is changing, as the boundaries between fact and fiction, truth and falsehood, become increasingly difficult to discern. At the same time, there are still those who continue to pursue knowledge in its purest form. The intellectual, the scientist, the philosopher. These individuals remain dedicated to uncovering the truths of the universe, to finding answers to the great questions that have haunted humanity for centuries. Yet, even in this pursuit, the lines between knowledge and power remain tangled. The discoveries of one era are often appropriated or distorted by those in power to serve their own ends. Knowledge, no matter how noble its pursuit, is not immune to the forces of manipulation, exploitation, and control. Whether it is the use of scientific knowledge for military purposes, the politicization of environmental data, or the suppression of inconvenient truths, the struggle for knowledge is still a battle for control over the future. As we move further into the digital age, the question of who controls knowledge is more pressing than ever. The internet may have promised to democratize information, but in reality, it has created new forms of inequality, where those with access to power and resources can manipulate the flow of information to their advantage. The struggle for forbidden knowledge has not disappeared. It has simply taken on new forms. The question remains: how do we navigate a world where the truth is increasingly elusive, where knowledge can be distorted, weaponized, and hidden from view? How do we ensure that the pursuit of knowledge remains a force for enlightenment rather than a tool for control? The answers are as complex and elusive as the knowledge itself, but the struggle for understanding continues. And with it, the battle for forbidden knowledge rages on. As humanity advanced into the 21st century, the dynamics of forbidden knowledge began to evolve in ways no one could have anticipated. The rapid pace of technological innovation and the explosion of information in the digital age created new questions about the accessibility, manipulation, and control of knowledge. Whereas knowledge had once been confined to the hands of intellectual elites, monarchs, or religious institutions, it was now available at the fingertips of anyone with an internet connection. And yet, this seemingly democratic access to information created new problems and new avenues for power to be wielded. The internet, for all its promises of open access to knowledge, became a paradox. While it allowed unprecedented levels of information exchange and connectivity, it also enabled the fragmentation and distortion of knowledge on a massive scale. The democratization of information was no longer just about spreading the truth. It became about controlling the narrative, shaping perceptions, and manipulating public opinion. In a world where everyone could publish their thoughts, opinions, and ideas, the line between fact and fiction blurred in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. One of the most notable developments in the battle for forbidden knowledge in the digital age was the rise of misinformation and disinformation. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube became central hubs for the spread of both truth and falsehood. While the internet allowed people to share ideas, challenge authority, and discuss previously taboo topics, it also opened the door for dangerous ideas, conspiracy theories, and outright lies to spread just as easily. The algorithms that powered these platforms, designed to prioritize engagement and maximize attention, became key players in the struggle for knowledge. They prioritized sensational, emotionally charged content, which often included false information, and pushed it to the forefront of public discourse. In this environment, knowledge was no longer something objective and verifiable. It became a battleground for competing interests, where the loudest voices and most sensational claims often drowned out more reasoned perspectives. The rise of fake news, conspiracy theories, and misinformation campaigns exposed a new form of control over knowledge: the manipulation of perception. Rather than simply controlling the distribution of information, powerful actors, whether they were governments, corporations, or even individuals, began to shape the way people saw the world. A conspiracy theory about a global elite controlling world events could be as dangerous as a state-sponsored propaganda campaign, and in both cases, the key to success was controlling the flow of information. The ease with which false narratives could spread on social media platforms highlighted the vulnerability of the modern information ecosystem. What was once considered forbidden knowledge, hidden truths or radical ideas, had now entered the public sphere, but instead of being enlightened by it, society found itself mired in confusion, distrust, and division. The political ramifications of this new information landscape were profound. In the years following the 2016 United States presidential election, the world witnessed the full scale of how digital platforms could be used to manipulate elections, sway public opinion, and even incite violence. Russian interference in the election, which included the use of bots and fake accounts to spread disinformation, was just the tip of the iceberg. Political campaigns around the world began to recognize the power of social media as a tool for shaping public sentiment, and soon digital manipulation became a core component of modern politics. Targeted ads, micro-targeting, and the collection of personal data allowed politicians to reach voters with a level of precision never before possible. Knowledge was no longer something shared equally. It was something tailored to specific individuals and groups, often reinforcing existing biases and deepening divisions. In addition to the political landscape, the rise of digital technology also transformed the battlefield for scientific knowledge. In the past, scientific discoveries were often hidden behind the walls of academia, accessible only to those with the right credentials or connections. Today, however, scientific research, once reserved for scholarly journals and university libraries, is available to the public in real time. This has both democratized science and opened it up to new forms of exploitation. The problem with scientific knowledge in the modern age is that while it is more accessible than ever, it is also more susceptible to distortion, misinterpretation, and manipulation. The rise of pseudoscience, climate change denialism, and anti-vaccine movements are clear examples of how scientific knowledge can be twisted to serve political or ideological ends. In the case of climate change, for example, the battle for knowledge became not just a debate over facts but a war over public perception. The overwhelming majority of scientists agree that human activity is contributing to global warming, yet the scientific consensus has been undermined by powerful corporations, interest groups, and political figures who have pushed a different narrative. These groups have used misinformation campaigns, media manipulation, and even outright denial to create doubt about the science of climate change, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. By framing the issue as one of competing ideologies rather than scientific fact, they have made it difficult for the public to discern what is true and what is false. The consequences of this manipulation are profound, as the fight over knowledge about the environment has real-world implications for policy, public health, and the future of the planet. Similarly, the anti-vaccine movement represents another example of how forbidden knowledge, scientific knowledge, has been manipulated to suit ideological purposes. Despite overwhelming evidence that vaccines are safe and effective, anti-vaccine groups have used misinformation and fear-mongering to convince millions of people to reject this knowledge. The consequences of this movement are not just theoretical. They have led to real-world outbreaks of preventable diseases, putting children and vulnerable populations at risk. The spread of anti-vaccine rhetoric is a clear example of how the control of knowledge, specifically scientific knowledge, can have disastrous effects on public health. However, the manipulation of knowledge is not limited to the scientific or political realms. The battle for forbidden knowledge has also extended to the realm of personal privacy. In the digital age, knowledge about individuals, what they search for online, where they shop, what they read, who they interact with, has become one of the most valuable commodities on the planet. Personal data is the new currency, and companies are willing to pay handsomely for it. The rise of big data analytics, surveillance capitalism, and the commodification of personal information has made it easier than ever for corporations and governments to shape the behavior of individuals on an individual level. Algorithms that track and predict behavior, from what you might buy next to who you might vote for, have created a new form of power, the ability to influence people without them even knowing it. Companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon are at the forefront of this new knowledge economy. They collect vast amounts of data on their users, tracking every click, every search, and every interaction. This data is then used to build detailed profiles of individuals, which can be sold to advertisers or used to influence behavior. The manipulation of personal data has led to a new kind of digital divide. where those with access to personal information and the ability to analyze it hold immense power over those who do not. This new form of power is not just about controlling knowledge. It's about controlling the way people think, behave, and make decisions. Yet, despite these growing challenges, there is still a growing movement to reclaim knowledge and ensure that it is used for the benefit of humanity. Open-source software, collaborative platforms, and grassroots organizations are working to make knowledge more accessible, more transparent, and more equitable. Movements like the open access movement in academic publishing, which seeks to make scholarly research available to the public for free, are examples of how people are fighting back against the monopolization of knowledge. The rise of citizen journalism, online education platforms, and decentralized media outlets also reflect a growing desire to democratize information and ensure that knowledge is no longer controlled by a select few. In many ways, the struggle for forbidden knowledge has shifted from a battle for control over information to a fight for the free and open exchange of ideas. As the digital landscape continues to evolve, the question of who controls knowledge will only become more pressing. In a world where the lines between truth and falsehood are increasingly difficult to distinguish, and where the manipulation of information is more prevalent than ever, the battle for knowledge will continue to shape the future of humanity. The stakes are higher than ever, and the consequences of allowing knowledge to be distorted or hidden are far-reaching. As we move forward into this new age of information, the struggle for forbidden knowledge will continue, and it will be up to each of us to ensure that the knowledge we seek, the knowledge we consume, and the knowledge we share is used not just to empower the few, but to uplift us all. The dynamics of forbidden knowledge have always been inextricably linked to the concept of secrecy and the fear that comes with the unveiling of certain truths. Throughout history, the pursuit of hidden knowledge has often been framed in opposition to mainstream belief systems, be they political, religious, or social. As societies became more organized, the control of knowledge evolved from a simple matter of access to a deeply rooted system of protection, suppression, and even distortion. What began as an effort to maintain power over certain ideas and doctrines has now expanded into a global struggle, where the sheer scale and speed of information flow present unprecedented challenges to the control of knowledge. The battle for knowledge, particularly forbidden knowledge, is no longer confined to academic elites or secret societies. It has become a matter of national security, corporate control, and individual empowerment. The turning point came with the advent of the Internet, a tool that promised to democratize knowledge in ways previously unimaginable. At its inception, the Internet was hailed as a new frontier, one that would usher in an era of openness and transparency. For the first time in human history, anyone with access to a computer could potentially access any piece of information, from ancient manuscripts to cutting-edge scientific research. The Internet appeared to be the great equalizer, a platform where knowledge could flow freely, unencumbered by the constraints of geography, wealth, or political power. It was the fulfillment of a dream that had been long held by philosophers, intellectuals, and activists alike. Knowledge as a universal resource, available to all. However, as the Internet grew and evolved, it quickly became clear that this idealistic vision of an open, transparent world was more complex than originally thought. The sheer volume of information available online became overwhelming, and with it came the challenge of sorting through vast amounts of data to distinguish truth from fiction. While the Internet allowed for a wealth of knowledge to be shared, it also made it easier to manipulate, distort, and create false narratives. The early promise of democratization was overshadowed by new questions of control. Who decides what information is accessible, and who is responsible for the veracity of the information? In the digital age, the battle for forbidden knowledge has become less about preventing access and more about controlling the narrative, shaping public perception, and influencing the way people process and internalize information. As the Internet became more integrated into everyday life, the boundaries between knowledge and power became increasingly blurred. The platforms that arose, social media networks like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, became the modern-day gates of knowledge, where the flow of information was not determined by scholarly journals or governmental edicts, but by algorithms designed to maximize engagement. These platforms, while ostensibly providing a space for free exchange of ideas, quickly became battlegrounds for competing interests. Political parties, corporations, and even individuals realized that controlling the flow of information on social media could shape public opinion, influence elections, and sway entire cultural movements. One of the most significant ways this battle manifested itself was through the spread of misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation refers to false or inaccurate information that is spread without intent to deceive, while disinformation involves the deliberate creation and dissemination of false information with the intent to mislead. Both phenomena have become rampant on the internet, where the lines between truth and falsehood are increasingly difficult to discern. The viral nature of social media means that misinformation and disinformation can spread faster than ever before, reaching millions of people in a matter of hours. The damage caused by these false narratives is not just theoretical, it has real-world consequences. From the rise of anti-vaccine movements, fueled by false information about vaccine safety, to the spread of conspiracy theories that undermine public trust in science and government, the manipulation of knowledge has had far-reaching impacts on global health, politics, and social cohesion. The rise of fake news and alternative facts has highlighted a new form of control over knowledge: the manipulation of perception. In a world where access to information is no longer the primary barrier to knowledge, the challenge lies in how that information is presented, interpreted, and consumed. The algorithms that drive social media platforms are designed to prioritize content that generates the most engagement, which often means prioritizing sensational, emotional, and divisive material over fact-based, thoughtful discourse. This creates an environment in which truth becomes secondary to entertainment and emotional reaction. The desire to generate clicks, shares, and likes becomes the driving force behind the dissemination of information, leaving little room for the nuance and complexity required for understanding the world in a meaningful way. The political implications of this new battle for knowledge are profound. Governments and political movements around the world have recognized the power of information control in shaping public opinion. In countries with autocratic regimes, the manipulation of knowledge is a central tool for maintaining power. The Russian government, for example, has been accused of using disinformation campaigns to destabilize democratic institutions, both within its borders and abroad. From the annexation of Crimea to the interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, the Russian state has actively sought to manipulate the global flow of information in ways that favor its political objectives. By sowing doubt, confusion, and division, these disinformation campaigns undermine trust in democratic institutions and erode social cohesion. The tools used in these campaigns, social media bots, fake news websites, and targeted ads, are now available to any group with the resources to exploit them, making the battle for knowledge a global one. In liberal democracies, the control over information plays out in more subtle ways, but the stakes are no less significant. Political campaigns increasingly rely on data analytics and micro-targeting to sway voters. By collecting vast amounts of personal data, political parties can tailor their messages to resonate with specific groups, often without the individuals even being aware of it. This personalized approach to information manipulation allows political actors to bypass traditional media filters and engage directly with voters, presenting a carefully curated version of reality that reinforces existing beliefs and prejudices. In this environment, knowledge is no longer something shared or contested. It becomes a tool for persuasion and influence, with the ultimate goal of securing power. The ethical implications of this are profound. If knowledge can be so easily tailored to manipulate people's thoughts and behavior, how can we trust the information we are exposed to? The manipulation of knowledge in the digital age is not limited to political campaigns. Corporations have become increasingly adept at controlling the flow of information to shape consumer behavior. In the world of advertising, brands are not just selling products, they are selling narratives. Through carefully crafted advertisements, social media influencers, and targeted online campaigns, corporations are shaping how we see the world, ourselves, and each other. Knowledge is no longer something we passively receive. It is something that is actively constructed and sold to us. The line between authentic information and corporate messaging has become increasingly difficult to draw. As companies collect vast amounts of data on consumer preferences, they are able to craft messages that feel personal, even intimate, making it easier to persuade individuals to purchase products, change their behavior, or adopt certain worldviews. This process of knowledge manipulation has profound consequences, not just for consumer choices, but for the way we understand ourselves and the world around us. At the same time, the rise of the digital economy has led to the commodification of knowledge itself. The information we share online, whether it is our browsing habits, our social media interactions, or the data we generate through our online purchases, has become a valuable commodity that can be bought, sold, and traded. Corporations like Google, Facebook, and Amazon amass vast quantities of data about individuals and use this information to target advertisements, recommend products, and shape our online experiences. The power of these corporations lies not just in the products they sell, but in the control they exert over the flow of knowledge. By controlling the algorithms that determine what information we see, they have the power to shape our perceptions, beliefs, and behaviors in ways that were previously unimaginable. This shift from the control of physical knowledge books, manuscripts, and lectures to the control of digital information has created new challenges for the modern world. While the internet has opened up vast new horizons for the free exchange of ideas, it has also created a world in which knowledge is increasingly fragmented, manipulated, and commodified. The battle for forbidden knowledge is no longer a matter of suppressing certain facts or ideas. It is about controlling the very systems through which knowledge is produced, disseminated, and consumed. In this new world, the struggle for knowledge is a fight for control over how we see the world, how we make decisions, and how we shape the future. As we move further into the digital age, the questions surrounding the control of knowledge will only grow more urgent. Who controls the platforms that distribute information? Who decides what knowledge is worth sharing and what is worth hiding? The answers to these questions will determine the future of democracy, human rights, and social cohesion in the 21st century. Knowledge, once seen as the key to enlightenment and freedom, has now become a battleground for power, control, and influence. And as we continue to navigate this complex and ever-changing landscape, the true nature of forbidden knowledge may become more elusive than ever before. The tension between the pursuit of knowledge and the potential consequences of uncovering certain truths has always been a central theme in human history. As long as knowledge has existed, so too has the desire to control it, to hide it, or to exploit it for personal or societal gain. The history of forbidden knowledge is deeply rooted in the notion that some truths are so powerful, so dangerous, that their dissemination could unravel the very fabric of society. This battle between the enlightened pursuit of truth and the often darker forces that seek to control knowledge has shaped the course of history in profound ways. The journey from secrecy to discovery, and sometimes to distortion, has always been marked by tension, and at times, tragedy. In the modern world, this dynamic is still alive, but it plays out on a much grander and more complex scale. With the rise of the digital age, the tools of knowledge acquisition have become more advanced, more accessible, and more easily manipulated. The advent of the internet brought with it the promise of democratizing information, providing people across the world with the ability to access, share, and create knowledge in ways never before possible. However, the same technologies that were heralded as liberating forces have also given rise to a new age of information warfare, where the control of knowledge is no longer the domain of governments or secret societies alone. The battle for knowledge has become a global struggle, waged on the fronts of social media, search engines, and even artificial intelligence. In this age of connectivity, knowledge is constantly being shaped and reshaped. What was once considered forbidden or restricted is now often readily available, but with a twist. The digital age has created a paradox. Information is abundant, yet truth seems more elusive than ever. The rise of misinformation, disinformation, and fake news has made it increasingly difficult to distinguish fact from fiction. The very platforms designed to disseminate knowledge have become breeding grounds for lies, conspiracy theories, and manipulative narratives. While knowledge is more accessible than ever, it has also become more fragmented, more susceptible to distortion, and more easily weaponized. Social media platforms, in particular, have become the central battleground for control over knowledge. These platforms, which were once envisioned as spaces for open dialogue and knowledge exchange, are now heavily influenced by algorithms that prioritize content based on engagement rather than accuracy. The result is a landscape where sensationalist stories, emotional headlines, and misleading content often dominate the discourse. These platforms have made it easier for anyone to broadcast their ideas, but they have also made it easier for misinformation to spread like wildfire. The sheer scale and speed at which information travels in the digital age mean that once a falsehood takes root, it can be incredibly difficult to correct. As a result, the knowledge that circulates online is not always reliable, and the truth is often buried beneath layers of distortion and manipulation. The battle for forbidden knowledge is not only about the information that is hidden, suppressed, or distorted. It is also about the information that is actively constructed, shaped, and presented to the public in ways that serve specific interests. In the past, knowledge was controlled by a small elite, whether it was the church, the monarchy, or a group of intellectuals. Today, the forces controlling knowledge are far more diffuse, but they are no less powerful. Corporations, political organizations, and media conglomerates now play a significant role in shaping what we know, how we know it, and how we understand the world. The pursuit of knowledge is no longer a purely intellectual endeavor. It is now deeply intertwined with power, money, and influence. The question of who controls knowledge has never been more important. This shift in how knowledge is controlled and disseminated has profound implications for society. The manipulation of knowledge has always been a tool for maintaining power, but in the modern world, the stakes have become even higher. The ability to control information allows those in power to shape public opinion, influence elections, and even dictate the course of history. In an era where data is king, the control of knowledge is also the control of people. The algorithms that power social media platforms and search engines are designed to predict and influence human behavior, making it easier for those who control these platforms to shape how we think, feel, and act. The manipulation of knowledge is no longer just about controlling what people know. It is about controlling how they see the world and how they make decisions. The digital age has also created new challenges when it comes to the pursuit of truth. While the internet has opened up new avenues for discovering forbidden knowledge, it has also made it easier for people to create and propagate false narratives. The ease with which content can be shared, reshared, and amplified on social media means that misinformation can spread faster than ever before. In some cases, falsehoods can take on a life of their own, becoming entrenched in the collective consciousness and shaping people's beliefs and behaviors. This has led to a new form of censorship, one that is not necessarily imposed by governments or institutions, but by algorithms and corporate interests. In some cases, what is deemed forbidden is not knowledge that is actively suppressed, but knowledge that is drowned out by the noise of misinformation. The spread of misinformation is not limited to politics or current events. It also extends to scientific knowledge. The digital age has made it possible for anyone to claim expertise on any subject, regardless of their qualifications. This has led to the rise of pseudoscience, where misinformation is presented as legitimate knowledge, often with devastating consequences. The anti-vaccine movement, for example, has been fueled by false claims about the safety and efficacy of vaccines, leading to a resurgence of preventable diseases. Similarly, climate change denialism has gained traction in some circles, despite the overwhelming scientific consensus on the issue. In both cases, the spread of false information has hindered progress and endangered public health and the environment. The battle for knowledge in the modern world is not just a battle for access to information, but a battle for the integrity of that information. The manipulation of knowledge is not limited to the digital realm. The traditional media landscape has also been affected by the shifting dynamics of information control. In many countries, the media has become increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few powerful corporations, which can shape the narratives that dominate the public discourse. In some cases, media outlets are openly partisan, serving the interests of particular political or corporate entities. In others, the drive for profit leads to sensationalism and the prioritization of entertainment over substance. The result is a media environment where the truth is often distorted to fit a particular agenda, and where knowledge is presented not as a pursuit of truth, but as a commodity to be bought and sold. The growing influence of corporate interests over knowledge has also raised questions about the commodification of information. In the past, knowledge was often seen as a public good, a resource that should be shared freely for the benefit of society. Today, however, knowledge has become a marketable commodity, something that can be bought, sold, and traded. The rise of subscription-based models for academic journals, for example, has made it increasingly difficult for the general public to access scientific research. The same is true for news outlets, where paywalls and subscriptions limit access to important information. The privatization of knowledge has created a system where access to information is determined not by a commitment to truth, but by the ability to pay. This has led to a situation where knowledge is no longer a universal right but a privilege reserved for those who can afford it. At the same time, the increasing concentration of power in the hands of a few corporations has raised concerns about the potential for censorship. Companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon have immense control over the flow of information, and they have the power to shape public discourse in ways that were previously unimaginable. The algorithms that govern these platforms determine what information people see, which voices are amplified, and which are silenced. In some cases, this has led to accusations of bias, with certain viewpoints being marginalized while others are promoted. In other cases, companies have been accused of suppressing information that is inconvenient to their interests, particularly when it comes to issues like environmental sustainability, corporate accountability, and social justice. The digital age has also given rise to a new form of activism, one that is focused on reclaiming knowledge and ensuring that it is used for the public good. Open source initiatives, online education platforms, and citizen journalism are all part of a growing movement to democratize knowledge and make it accessible to everyone, regardless of their economic status or geographical location. These efforts are not only about providing access to information but also about ensuring that the information we consume is accurate, reliable, and transparent. The goal is to create a more equitable system of knowledge exchange, one that is not controlled by a select few but is available to all. The rise of decentralized platforms and the push for open-access academic publishing are examples of how people are fighting back against the monopolization of knowledge and striving to create a more inclusive and transparent system. As we move further into the digital age, the struggle for knowledge will continue to evolve. The Internet has created new opportunities for the exchange of ideas, but it has also created new challenges when it comes to the integrity of that knowledge. The battle for forbidden knowledge is no longer just about uncovering hidden truths or breaking down barriers to information. It is about ensuring that the information we have access to is not manipulated, distorted, or commodified for the benefit of the few. As the digital landscape continues to shift, the fight for knowledge will remain one of the most important battles of our time, with far-reaching implications for democracy, freedom, and the future of humanity. As humanity continues to explore the vast realms of the unknown, there exists a profound paradox. While knowledge, particularly that which is hidden or forbidden, has the potential to enlighten and uplift, it can also corrupt, destabilize, and bring great harm. Throughout history, the quest for truth and understanding has been a dual-edged sword, often veering into dangerous territories where the pursuit of knowledge becomes intertwined with the thirst for power. In many ways, this very pursuit has created not only enlightenment but also profound societal and psychological consequences. The ancient notion of forbidden knowledge goes far beyond simple censorship or intellectual suppression. It speaks to the deep, often destructive, consequences that can arise when truths are unearthed that challenge the foundation of accepted norms and values. The journey toward forbidden knowledge is as old as civilization itself. From the earliest days of humanity, the pursuit of knowledge has been driven by a desire to understand the forces that shape our lives, from the natural world to the heavens above. In ancient cultures, knowledge was considered sacred, often reserved for the elite or those who held positions of power, such as priests, philosophers, or kings. This exclusivity wasn't just about preserving a sense of hierarchy. It was also about the perceived danger of certain truths. Ancient texts, like those from the Babylonians, Egyptians, and Greeks, often included warnings that some knowledge, if misused, could lead to chaos, madness, or destruction. This notion wasn't grounded in superstition alone, but in a deep understanding that some things, when revealed, have the power to disrupt the natural order of society, the psyche, or even the very fabric of the universe. Take, for instance, the ancient mythologies that speak of gods and mortals seeking forbidden knowledge. In Greek mythology, Prometheus defied the gods to give fire to humanity, an act that symbolized the acquisition of divine knowledge. However, while fire could warm and enlighten, it also had the potential to burn and destroy. Prometheus' punishment, bound to a rock and subjected to eternal torment, serves as a cautionary tale of the consequences of revealing knowledge that transcends human limits. This mythological lens highlights a critical theme that continues to echo through human history. Knowledge, once obtained, is not always beneficial. It can transcend the moral frameworks that bind society, often placing those who seek it in conflict with established systems. In the medieval period, the concept of forbidden knowledge evolved, often tied to religious institutions and dogma. During this time, the Church held immense power over intellectual pursuits. Knowledge that contradicted religious doctrine was deemed heretical and actively suppressed. The Church's control over knowledge was not only a matter of spiritual governance but also of temporal power. The Church understood that if certain ideas were allowed to spread, they could undermine its authority. For instance, the heliocentric theory proposed by Copernicus and later championed by Galileo threatened the long-held geocentric view that placed Earth at the center of the universe. The idea that the Earth was not the center of creation was seen as a challenge to the divine order, and Galileo was forced to recant his views under threat of persecution. The struggle between scientific discovery and religious dogma during the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods highlighted another critical aspect of forbidden knowledge: the tension between intellectual freedom and established power structures. As scientific knowledge grew, so did the ability to challenge long-standing beliefs and ideologies. This clash led to a series of intellectual revolutions, with thinkers like Isaac Newton, René Descartes, and John Locke advancing ideas that ultimately reshaped Western thought. Yet, this intellectual freedom came at a great cost. Many of these thinkers were persecuted, their works banned or censored, as their ideas undermined the authority of powerful institutions. The challenge was not merely intellectual, it was deeply political, as those in power recognized that new knowledge could destabilize their control. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the notion of forbidden knowledge takes on new forms. The two world wars, the Cold War, and the rise of totalitarian regimes each created a new landscape in which knowledge, both its acquisition and its suppression, became critical to national security and global power dynamics. During the Cold War, the arms race and the race to develop nuclear weapons turned knowledge into a high-stakes, covert contest between the United States and the Soviet Union. The knowledge of atomic energy, once seen as a potential tool for progress, became a weapon of mass destruction. The development of nuclear bombs and their subsequent use on Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought to light the potential dangers of knowledge when harnessed for destruction. In this period, we also saw the rise of scientific experimentation that pushed the boundaries of ethics and human rights. One such example was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which involved the unethical treatment of African American men who were denied proper medical care and lied to for the purpose of studying the progression of untreated syphilis. This horrifying example underscores how knowledge, when corrupted by institutional power and a lack of moral consideration, can lead to profound harm. In the pursuit of scientific understanding, the lines between right and wrong were often blurred, and the manipulation of knowledge for ideological or political ends became a dark reality. However, the 20th century also marked the dawn of an age where forbidden knowledge began to shift from physical secrets to abstract, digital ones. With the rise of the Internet, the nature of forbidden knowledge became less about access to hidden books or elite scientific discoveries and more about the control of information in a global, interconnected world. The digital revolution brought with it the promise of unprecedented access to knowledge, yet it also created new forms of control. The information age has made it easier for powerful entities, governments, corporations, and even individuals to shape the narrative of what constitutes truth and knowledge. The Internet democratized access to information in many ways, but it also gave rise to new forms of suppression. While some truths that were once kept in the shadows, such as government corruption or corporate malfeasance, could now be exposed, there was also a growing sense of manipulation and distortion. Social media, for example, became a new tool for the rapid spread of both knowledge and disinformation. The same platforms that allowed for the exchange of ideas and the discovery of hidden truths also became fertile grounds for fake news, conspiracy theories, and ideological manipulation. Algorithms, designed to engage users and keep them hooked, ended up amplifying sensational and misleading content, distorting the flow of information and clouding the distinction between fact and fiction. This digital age has created a new kind of forbidden knowledge. Knowledge that is manipulated, obscured, or distorted to serve particular agendas. As the amount of data generated online grows exponentially, it has become more difficult to separate valuable knowledge from the noise. In the era of big data, information is increasingly seen as a commodity to be bought, sold, and controlled. Corporations and governments track, store, and analyze the personal data of individuals on a scale never before imagined. In many cases, this data is used not to enlighten, but to manipulate and influence decisions, behaviors, and even political outcomes. One striking example of this manipulation comes from the use of microtargeting in political campaigns. In recent years, political parties and candidates have used sophisticated data analytics to craft highly personalized political messages designed to resonate with specific individuals or groups. While this targeted approach allows for more direct communication, it also raises serious ethical concerns. By exploiting personal data, campaigns can craft narratives that appeal to emotions and biases, often bypassing reasoned debate and critical thought. In this way, knowledge is no longer a neutral force for enlightenment. It becomes a tool for control. The rapid spread of misinformation and the rise of alternative facts have created an environment where knowledge is no longer universally accepted or trusted. The very idea of objective truth is increasingly under attack, and in some circles, facts have become subjective, shaped by personal beliefs, political ideologies, or corporate interests. The digital age has made it more difficult than ever to discern the difference between genuine knowledge and manipulated information. What was once considered forbidden knowledge, the kind of knowledge that could challenge the powers that be, has now been co-opted, distorted, and used to further the agendas of those in power. Yet, despite these challenges, the pursuit of knowledge remains a powerful force. In many ways, the quest for forbidden knowledge has never been more urgent. In a world increasingly marked by division, distrust, and polarization, the need for objective, verifiable truth is more important than ever. The digital age may have made it easier to manipulate knowledge, but it has also created new opportunities for the free exchange of ideas. Independent journalists, whistleblowers, and citizen activists continue to push back against the forces that seek to control information. As the struggle for knowledge moves into the digital realm, it will undoubtedly be shaped by both the dark forces that seek to distort and suppress it, and the bright lights of truth that continue to shine through the cracks. The struggle for forbidden knowledge is not just about uncovering hidden truths. It is about how we as individuals, societies, and nations choose to use that knowledge. The potential for knowledge to enlighten, empower, and inspire is limitless, but so too is its capacity to deceive, control, and harm. In the end, it is not the knowledge itself that is dangerous but how it is wielded. The more we uncover, the more we must question not only what we know, but also how we use that knowledge and to what ends. As the boundaries of knowledge continue to stretch into the unknown, humanity has entered a period of profound transformation. With each breakthrough, each new discovery, new dimensions of understanding emerge, yet so do new complexities, challenges, and risks. The thirst for forbidden knowledge, the kind of wisdom that has the power to reshape reality itself, has never been more pronounced. But what happens when knowledge is no longer confined to the hands of the few, to the gatekeepers of tradition, science, or politics? What happens when everyone has access to not only wisdom but also dangerous truths that can shatter conventional thinking? The very fabric of society begins to fray. Old paradigms collapse, and new, often contradictory, ways of seeing the world are created. At the core of this quest for forbidden knowledge lies a timeless struggle. The desire to understand the world in its deepest, most intimate sense, coupled with the inevitable danger of what such understanding can unlock. In the past, forbidden knowledge was often defined as information or wisdom that was actively hidden or suppressed, whether by religious institutions, monarchies, or intellectual elites. The very idea of keeping knowledge secret was grounded in the belief that certain truths were too powerful for the masses to bear. It was a way of maintaining order, control, and power. But in the 21st century, the nature of forbidden knowledge has changed. It is no longer confined to books hidden in dusty libraries or whispered among underground societies. It exists in the sprawling digital landscape of the internet, in the algorithms that dictate the flow of information, and in the data harvested from every corner of our digital lives. Knowledge, once restricted and guarded, is now a commodity, a battleground for influence and control. One of the most significant shifts in the way forbidden knowledge is perceived in the modern world is how it has become entangled with the concept of power. In the past, knowledge was seen as a tool for enlightenment, a means of transcending ignorance, superstition, and fear. However, in today's world, the struggle for knowledge has taken on a more insidious character. The battle for forbidden knowledge is no longer simply about the pursuit of truth. It has become about the control of reality itself. Power no longer lies solely in military strength, political influence, or economic dominance. In an age where information reigns supreme, power is derived from who controls knowledge and how that knowledge is wielded. Take, for example, the rise of surveillance capitalism. In an era where personal data is the new gold, companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon have mastered the art of controlling knowledge through data. Every click, every purchase, every interaction we make online is meticulously recorded, analyzed, and sold. The data harvested from individuals across the globe is not just a tool for improving services or tailoring advertisements. It's a form of knowledge that allows these corporations to manipulate behaviors, shape consumer desires, and even influence political outcomes. This is the modern version of forbidden knowledge. Knowledge that is hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our digital lives, and used not for the benefit of the public but for the enrichment and control of a select few. This kind of knowledge is not just about facts or information, it's about manipulating perception and controlling narratives. In the digital age, the battle for forbidden knowledge is not about suppressing certain facts but about curating the information we consume, shaping our understanding of reality itself. Algorithms, designed to maximize engagement, prioritize content that is sensational, emotionally charged, or divisive, while relegating nuanced, fact-based discourse to the margins. As a result, the very nature of knowledge is transformed. It is no longer about uncovering truths or expanding understanding. It becomes a means of shaping reality, of constructing a version of the world that aligns with the interests of those in power. This shift in the nature of forbidden knowledge is particularly evident in the realm of politics. In the past, political leaders controlled knowledge through traditional forms of media, newspapers, television broadcasts, and speeches. Today, the ability to control knowledge has become decentralized, distributed across countless platforms, with social media acting as the new arena for political influence. The rise of fake news and conspiracy theories is a direct consequence of this new age of information warfare. Political campaigns, both overt and covert, now rely on the strategic manipulation of knowledge to sway public opinion, distort the truth, and incite division. Misinformation spreads at lightning speed across social media platforms, reaching millions of people before the facts can even catch up. The consequences of this manipulation are profound. When knowledge is no longer rooted in objective truth but becomes a battleground for competing narratives, the very foundation of democratic societies is eroded. Citizens are left to navigate a world where they can no longer trust what they read, hear, or see. The line between fact and fiction becomes increasingly difficult to discern, and with it, the ability to make informed decisions, whether in politics, public health, or social issues, is undermined. In this context, the concept of forbidden knowledge takes on a new dimension. Knowledge that was once hidden or suppressed is now freely available. Yet it is often distorted, manipulated, or weaponized. The knowledge that should be used to empower individuals and foster collective understanding is now used to sow discord, spread fear, and manipulate the masses. What was once seen as a tool for liberation has become a means of control. This paradox, where knowledge is simultaneously more accessible than ever before and more prone to distortion and misuse, defines the modern age. Beyond politics, the pursuit of forbidden knowledge also intersects with deeply personal and philosophical questions. The internet has made it easier for people to access a wide array of knowledge, from ancient texts to cutting-edge scientific research. In some ways, this has democratized access to information, allowing individuals to explore topics that were once the domain of academics, philosophers, and experts. However, This abundance of knowledge also raises difficult questions about the limits of human understanding. What happens when people encounter ideas or information that challenges the very core of their beliefs? What happens when the knowledge they seek conflicts with their understanding of morality, spirituality, or existence itself? Throughout history, many have sought forbidden knowledge not just for intellectual curiosity but for personal transformation. In the ancient world, mystics, philosophers, and alchemists sought to understand the hidden forces of the universe, believing that such knowledge could lead to spiritual enlightenment, immortality, or ultimate power. The pursuit of forbidden knowledge in these contexts was often seen as a path to transcendence, a way to unlock hidden dimensions of reality and experience a deeper connection with the divine or the cosmos. But this pursuit often came with a price. The search for knowledge in these realms was fraught with danger. To uncover too much, to peer too deeply into the unknown, was to risk losing one's sanity, one's soul, or even one's life. This theme is echoed in modern culture, where the pursuit of forbidden knowledge often appears in literature, film, and pop culture as a metaphor for the dangers of overreaching ambition. Whether it's the archetype of the mad scientist, the occultist seeking to summon dark forces, or the rogue technologist pushing the boundaries of ethical science, the narrative remains the same. Some knowledge is simply too dangerous to possess. It can warp the mind, corrupt the soul, and ultimately destroy the very person who seeks it. The fear of this type of knowledge is rooted in the belief that understanding the world too deeply, peering too far into the abyss, can change one's perception of reality in ways that are irreversible. In the modern world, these questions take on new forms. As scientific advancements continue to push the boundaries of what is possible, questions arise about the ethical implications of acquiring certain kinds of knowledge. The ability to alter the human genome, create artificial intelligence, and manipulate the very building blocks of life presents profound questions about the nature of humanity, the purpose of life, and the responsibilities that come with such power. The pursuit of knowledge in these realms is fraught with ethical dilemmas. What is the line between scientific progress and hubris? At what point does the search for knowledge become a threat to humanity itself? The fear of forbidden knowledge is not just about the dangers it poses to the individual but also to society as a whole. If humanity were to uncover truths that fundamentally alter our understanding of existence, the social, political, and cultural implications could be catastrophic. What happens if we discover, for example, that life on Earth is not as unique as we once thought, or that our understanding of consciousness, free will, or morality is completely flawed? These are not abstract concerns. They are real possibilities that could, in theory, emerge from the continued pursuit of knowledge. And with them comes the challenge of how we, as a species, choose to integrate these revelations into the fabric of our lives. This sense of the dangerous power of knowledge is reflected in the ways in which various institutions, governments, corporations, and religious organizations seek to control the flow of information. The desire to control knowledge is as old as civilization itself. Whether through censorship, propaganda, or secrecy, those in power have long understood that controlling the narrative is the key to maintaining control. The desire to keep certain knowledge hidden is rooted in the belief that some truths are simply too destabilizing to be revealed. In the digital age, this desire for control has taken on new dimensions. The fight for forbidden knowledge is no longer just about information. It's about shaping perception, controlling reality, and influencing the choices of billions of people. The power of knowledge, both its potential to liberate and its potential to destroy, is the ultimate paradox of human existence. As we move forward into the future, the struggle for forbidden knowledge will continue to shape the course of our civilization. Will we choose to use our newfound wisdom to build a more enlightened and just world, or will we succumb to the temptation of using it as a tool for domination and control? Only time will tell, but the consequences of that choice will reverberate across generations. The pursuit of forbidden knowledge will always be a double-edged sword, capable of both great good and unimaginable harm. It is up to us to decide which path we take. The human fascination with forbidden knowledge has been a defining feature of our history, influencing everything from ancient religious texts to modern scientific advancements. This desire to uncover truths that lie beyond the boundaries of societal norms, to understand the mysteries that govern our existence, is woven into the very fabric of human nature. But as much as this yearning for knowledge has propelled us forward, it has also come at a great cost, both personal and societal. The pursuit of forbidden knowledge, in its many forms, often leads to dangerous consequences, whether it is the unraveling of age-old beliefs, the destabilization of societies, or the unraveling of one's very sense of self. In ancient civilizations, the concept of forbidden knowledge was often tied to divine forces. Knowledge was viewed as sacred, and those who sought it were seen as either blessed or cursed, depending on the circumstances. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians believed that the gods controlled access to knowledge, and only a select few priests, kings, and shamans were deemed worthy of acquiring it. Similarly, the ancient Egyptians revered knowledge as a powerful tool, yet it was a tool that only the highest echelons of society could wield. To seek knowledge outside of these established parameters was considered a transgression, a betrayal of the natural order, and the consequences of such transgressions were severe. The pursuit of forbidden knowledge was not just about uncovering scientific facts or hidden truths. It was, in many ways, a spiritual endeavor. The early alchemists, for instance, believed that through the study of chemistry and the transformation of base materials into gold, they could uncover hidden mysteries of the universe. However, this search was deeply tied to spiritual and mystical beliefs. The alchemists were not simply concerned with material wealth. They believed that through their work, they could transcend the limitations of the human body and soul. The philosopher's stone, which was said to grant immortality, was the ultimate goal of alchemy. Yet, throughout history, these seekers of forbidden knowledge often found themselves caught in a web of contradictions between the desire to transcend the material world and the inevitable consequences of their actions. The tension between seeking forbidden knowledge and its consequences is perhaps most famously exemplified in the tale of Prometheus. In Greek mythology, Prometheus defied the gods by stealing fire from Mount Olympus and giving it to humanity. Fire, as a symbol of knowledge, represents the power to create, destroy, and transform. By giving humanity this divine gift, Prometheus bestowed upon mankind the ability to shape the world as they saw fit. However, this knowledge came at a cost. Prometheus was bound to a rock, his liver eaten by an eagle every day for eternity. This punishment served as a reminder that the pursuit of forbidden knowledge is fraught with danger. Knowledge that empowers also corrupts, and those who seek it may face dire consequences. Fast forward to the Renaissance and the early days of scientific inquiry, and we see a shift in how forbidden knowledge is perceived. The advent of the printing press in the 15th century played a key role in making knowledge more widely accessible. Previously, knowledge had been guarded by religious and political authorities, who restricted access to information that might challenge their power. The Church, for example, kept much of its teachings hidden from the masses, offering only a narrow view of the world that was aligned with its doctrines. But with the printing press, ideas began to spread more rapidly, and new knowledge began to flourish in ways that were impossible to control. The Protestant Reformation, led by Martin Luther, was one of the first major upheavals that resulted from this surge in knowledge dissemination. Luther's challenge to the authority of the Catholic Church was, in many ways, a confrontation with the idea of forbidden knowledge. His 95 Theses, which criticized the Church's sale of indulgences, was an act of defiance against an institution that had long monopolized access to spiritual knowledge. Luther's rebellion opened the floodgates for a more decentralized form of knowledge, one that could not be so easily controlled by any single authority. In the wake of this, many scholars and philosophers began to question the accepted dogma of the time, leading to the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a period marked by a deep commitment to reason, science, and the idea that knowledge should be freely available to all. Thinkers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Immanuel Kant challenged the traditional structures of power and authority, advocating for a society where knowledge was not hoarded by the few but shared by the many. However, this intellectual revolution also had its darker side. The Enlightenment thinkers, while advocating for rational thought and empirical evidence, were not immune to the same urge to control knowledge that had plagued earlier civilizations. Some of the great thinkers of the time, while pushing for greater freedoms, also embraced a view of knowledge that placed it in the hands of a select few. The rise of scientific inquiry during this period also brought with it a new set of ethical dilemmas. The pursuit of knowledge was no longer just about understanding the natural world, it was about reshaping it. The advent of technologies like the microscope, the telescope, and the printing press allowed scientists to peer deeper into the workings of the universe. But with each new discovery, the boundaries of what was considered acceptable grew increasingly blurred. In the name of scientific progress, controversial experiments were conducted on human beings, animals, and even the environment. The darker side of scientific inquiry, the willingness to sacrifice ethical considerations for the sake of knowledge, emerged in full force. The consequences of these actions were most acutely felt during the age of colonialism and imperialism. The so-called Age of Discovery was, in many ways, an era of forbidden knowledge. European explorers, armed with new technologies and scientific theories, ventured to the farthest reaches of the earth, bringing back exotic specimens, knowledge of new lands, and, most troublingly, new ways of justifying the domination of native peoples. In the name of science and discovery, entire cultures were exploited, enslaved, and erased from history. The knowledge that was uncovered during this period was often used to justify colonial exploitation, presenting the discovery of new lands and peoples as a civilizing mission. The desire for knowledge, which should have been an act of exploration and understanding, was twisted into a tool of control and subjugation. This manipulation of knowledge continued into the 20th century, particularly during the two world wars. The development of nuclear weapons, for instance, represents one of the most dramatic examples of forbidden knowledge in modern history. The discovery of atomic energy was hailed as a monumental achievement in science, but the application of this knowledge to create bombs that could destroy entire cities left humanity grappling with its implications. The development of nuclear weapons was not just a scientific breakthrough. It was a moment where knowledge became inextricably linked with global power, fear, and destruction. The fact that such powerful knowledge was wielded by a handful of nations gave rise to a new era of geopolitics, where the control of knowledge, particularly military and technological knowledge, became a matter of national security. As we move further into the 21st century, the nature of forbidden knowledge continues to evolve. In the digital age, knowledge is no longer contained within books or laboratories. It exists in the vast networks of information that stretch across the internet. The rise of the internet and social media has democratized knowledge to a certain extent, making information more widely accessible than ever before. But this accessibility also brings with it a new set of dangers. While the internet allows for the free exchange of ideas, it also provides a platform for misinformation, propaganda, and manipulation. The very tools that were once used to democratize knowledge are now being used to manipulate public opinion, spread lies, and control narratives. The concept of forbidden knowledge in the modern age is no longer confined to religious or political authorities. It is now in the hands of corporations, tech giants, and powerful individuals who control the flow of information. The rise of surveillance capitalism, in which personal data is harvested, analyzed, and sold for profit, represents a new kind of forbidden knowledge. This knowledge is not about uncovering hidden truths. It is about controlling the personal and collective narratives of billions of people. In this new digital landscape, knowledge is a commodity, a tool of influence, and a weapon that can be used to shape the behavior and beliefs of entire populations. Despite these challenges, the human thirst for knowledge remains undiminished. The desire to understand the mysteries of the universe, to uncover the secrets that have been hidden for centuries, continues to drive innovation and exploration. However, as history has shown, this pursuit of knowledge is fraught with danger. The more we learn, the more we must question what we do with that knowledge, who controls it, and what the consequences of its application may be. The story of forbidden knowledge is not just about the truths we uncover. It is about the responsibility that comes with that knowledge. The pursuit of wisdom, once a path to enlightenment, has now become a path fraught with peril. And as we continue down that path, we must ask ourselves, are we ready to bear the consequences of the knowledge we seek?